Jesse, are we good to go?
We are live.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the September 22, 2020 City Council Special Video Meeting. That's long. Prior to tonight's virtual City Council meeting, Council had an executive session for approximately 90 minutes to discuss with legal counsel pending or potential litigation pursuant to RCW 42.30.110, paren 1, close paren small I, close paren, using video conferencing technology provided by Microsoft Teams. No action was taken. Tonight's City Council meeting is using video conferencing technology provided by Zoom. The Zoom video of this meeting is being broadcast live and will be uploaded to the city's YouTube channel later this evening. City Manager Jesse Vaughn, City Attorney Beal Park, and several other staff members are participating in tonight's meeting remotely. Actually, I see City Manager is actually in the City Council chambers tonight. Other public audience members are listening to the meeting by telephone or via the internet. Welcome all for joining us tonight. Council members, please ensure that your microphones are turned on for the roll call. Will the city clerk please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Does somebody both okay, we'll try this again. Mayor Vincent Wong?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Wendy Weicker?
Here.
Councilmember Lisa Anderall? Here. Councilmember Jake Jacobson?
Here.
Councilmember Salim Neese?
Here.
Councilmember Craig Reynolds?
Here.
And Councilmember Rosenbaum?
Here.
Great, thank you. We now move to the first item of business, which is to approve the agenda. Before entertaining a motion, I want to state that Governor Inslee's proclamation number 20-28.8 regarding the Open Public Meetings Act extends the statutory waivers and suspensions through October 1. Council may have a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Neese and seconded by Councilmember Jacobson to approve tonight's agenda. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Jacobson?
Aye.
Councilmember Reynolds? Deputy Mayor Weicker?
Aye.
Mayor Wong?
Aye.
Councilmember Anderall?
Aye.
Councilmember Neese?
Aye.
And Councilmember Rosenbaum?
Aye.
Thank you.
Great. Tonight's agenda has been approved. Tonight's agenda will not include in-person public appearances in accordance with Proclamation 20-28.8 and there's extended safe start order. However, individuals wishing to speak live during the appearances portion of our meeting may do so by telephone or using the Zoom teleconferencing application. Provided, however, they have registered their desire to speak with the city clerk by 4 p.m. today. Our city clerk will call you by name or telephone number when it is your turn to speak. This is an opportunity for anyone to speak to the city council on any item. All remarks will be addressed to the council as a whole and not to any individual council member or staff member. If any person makes a personal, impertinent, or slanderous remark or becomes boisterous, threatening, or personally abusive while addressing the council, I may request that the person leave the meeting. When it is your turn to address the council, be sure to speak audibly and state your name for the record. Your comments will be limited to 3 minutes. I will provide you a 30-second and a 15-second warning when your time is about ready to expire. City Clerk, has anybody signed up to speak before the council?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have one individual, and that's Ms. Meg Lippert.
Welcome, welcome, Meg.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can. You might want to try to speak up a little louder.
Can you see me?
Now?
No.
Okay.
We are working on that, Meg.
Okay. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Meg Lippert, Mercer Island. Mercerdale Park has been protected for decades by islanders. And now the park is up for grabs
Alfredo, can
again
you
with a
kill
proposal by a hired
Craig's
architect
camera?
that a prefab building be dumped on the parking lot adjacent to the recycling center. As a published writer of over 20 books, words are important to me. I believe the city manager when she said on April 2nd, quote, "Here's what I can tell you, Mercer Island community. There won't be any surprises. When the work begins again, we will provide you with ample notice." As a storyteller, remembering the past is important to me. Mercer Islanders have fought to protect their parkland in the past, and I presume that they will continue to do so. And as a citizen in a democracy, I realized that wasn't on my video, sorry about that. And as a citizen in a democracy, I believe that elected representatives will truly represent those who elected them, which to my mind would require that before initiating a wholesale remodel of a building, the representatives would first have consulted those who live in that area for their thoughts and feelings about the proposal. Council members, if one of you were a neighbor to the thrift shop, would you hope, would you even dare to assume that the current proposal to expand it would have been brought before you for consideration by your elected representatives before $50,000 of taxpayer funds had been allocated for its fast-track study? I'm asking you now for 3 actions. 1, please abide by your words and do not initiate a new, expensive, and controversial project during this time of pandemic when people cannot attend meetings. 2, please remember the past. MICA, which was approved by a previous city council, failed because council members underestimated Islanders' passion for protecting their parkland, wasting both money and city staff time. 3, please seek input from the residents in the Mercerdale neighborhood and other residents whom you represent, and please don't make decisions that will affect people you represent without their input. Remember the Kite Hill proposal, the MICA battle, the continuing JCC fiasco, and the failed police project and their wasted costs of time and money. Finally, unfortunately, none of us can read the future, and no one can predict whether any bricks and mortar store will succeed following a long pandemic during which people have learned to do their thrift shop buying online. In the September 2020 AARP Bulletin, an article on page 30 headed "New Bargains in Old Clothes" states, and here's the article: "Many new buying opportunities have emerged beyond neighborhood thrift shops. The online resale clothing market was booming even before COVID-19 shut down brick and mortar stores. Increasing online sales reap the same income with much less expense as physically expanding the bricks and mortar store." In conclusion, I would like to suggest an alternative. Instead of dropping a prefab on public parkland, I suggest you drop 1 or 2 prefabs on the empty land surrounding City Hall and keep the entire thrift shop drop-off location off of public parkland. Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. There will be no further appearances. We will now move to special business. We now move to our first item of special business, Agenda Bill 5753, the update on thrift shop facility study, investigation, and estimates. No action is required regarding this agenda bill. We are here only to discuss it at this time. And for that, to lead us on that discussion, welcome Public Works Director Jason Kittner and Senior Project Manager Gareth Reese.
Mayor Wong, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen with the presentation on it?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
And as a reminder, just if you have questions, please raise your hand and I'll recognize you.
Good evening, Council. Jason Kittner, Public Works Director. With me tonight is Gareth Reese, our Senior Projects Manager, as well as the Osborne Architect team, Anise Ademska and Jerry Osborne. Got about 14 or 15 slides to go through tonight. We're going to start with an update on the thrift shop operations, and then we'll dive into the presentation of the conceptual options and cost estimates. So good news to share this evening. As you know, the thrift shop has partially reopened. They're open on Sundays. This is due to the COVID pandemic, and our online sales continue. With the reopening of the thrift shop, we've had to take some additional safety measures, including pretty significant restriction of the occupancy of the building to only 30%. So that really equates to no more than 21 customers in the building at a time. And we've also implemented additional safety measures such as social distancing, facial coverings, and customer traffic management, arrows and transition planning. The donation processing, unfortunately, has not reopened to date. Since February of 2020, we have not received donations. So the thrift sale opening is using current goods. prior to the COVID pandemic. We are looking closely at how to open up our donation processing. However, with the COVID pandemic, additional quarantine and collection requirements will be in place for that donation processing. What we do know with the additional donation processing is it's going to require more space due to the COVID requirements. So staff is currently evaluating a 2-building model to begin a donation collection. Staff is also continuing to prioritize the reopening of additional days for the thrift shop. We anticipate that more days operational hours will be in place in mid-October, assuming there are no further changes in the COVID requirements or guidance coming from the governor's office, the Department of Health, or CDC. It is important that we rebuild our volunteer network. Current volunteer numbers are significantly reduced. Prior to the COVID pandemic, we had 70 volunteers, and we're now operating with 8. It's likely due to a combination of the shutdown, the limited function of the thrift shop, or just general pandemic-related apprehension. As you know, the volunteers will be critical to increasing our retail hours and processing donations and expanding our operations in the future. So once again, staff is evaluating a 2-building operation. It's likely that donations, when we do accept them, will be in an event-style format, meaning it will no longer just be a free-for-all drop-off at the thrift shop during open hours. It'll likely be a scheduled event once a month, once a week, that'll slowly ramp up over time. But that's due to making sure that we can take in the products and that they meet the COVID requirements. It's very likely that when we do open up the donation processing, restrictions will be necessary. For example, due to limited space, we're probably not going to be able to accept large bulky items or furniture. Again, our EOC team is evaluating this and creating an operational plan to ensure compliance with the COVID requirements. The city facility, just so everyone's clear, that we are looking at is using an idle city facility like the community center. Again, we're not wedded to that at this point in time, but we're closely looking at it. Moving on to the thrift shop and recycle center remodel, just to familiarize ourselves again with the conversation in June, the overall project goals for the thrift shop was to expand the thrift shop floor space, provide additional floor space. In order to create that floor space, we are looking to move the processing of donations and goods to the recycle center. Additionally, we're also looking to create new additional office areas and ADA restrooms in the thrift shop. So tonight for council conversation and consideration are 2 options that have been developed. Option A closely resembles the conceptual design that was presented in early June. And option B is a smaller remodel of the existing thrift shop, but adding additional processing space at the recycle center. Costs related to each of the facility are estimated separately, so the options can be combined or modified. So example, the thrift shop option could be combined with a different processing location. So as we start to look at the concepts, the picture on the screen before you is the existing facilities. And I encourage you to pay close attention to the color scheme because that color scheme will be consistent throughout the options. As you can see in the thrift shop, the thrift store, the green or aqua color represents the retail, the orange represents the processing space, and the yellow is the miscellaneous or back of house. As you can see on the recycle center, we don't have any color code on the recycle center for an existing facility because it's really being used as a storage facility right now for goods, not necessarily being used for processing. As we move forward, option A, again, this was tailored to the conceptual design or conceptual model that was presented in June. As you can see, the open floor concept on both the lower floor and the upper floor. The lower floor is on the left, the far left of your screen. The upper floor is on the right. You can see there's removing of the structural walls and really opening up the floor space in option A. At the recycle center, again, with the conceptual model or design that was presented in June, we tried to stay within the existing footprint of the recycle center. So as you can see, we have some additional processing space and back of house functionality at the recycle center, but it's really contained to the thrift shop space and utilizing and closing the awning or patio area at the recycle center. Option A expands the retail floor space at the thrift shop by just under 2,000 square feet. Again, it opens up the floor space to a more open concept for the retail area and relocates the processing and donations to the recycle center. What do we know now that we didn't know back in June? As you can see, before you skip to the bottom of the slide, the cost estimate for option A is higher than we anticipated. The estimated construction cost is 1.37 mil for option A. Why is that? One of the big reasons that we've determined through our structural analysis is that the thrift shop has actually been remodeled on at least 3 occasions. So walls that were originally anticipated to be removed were structural or are structural and will require additional engineering. With the removal, to achieve that open concept, the removal of the structural walls will prompt a substantial alteration permit, as well as a full structural and seismic upgrade and full energy upgrade of the facility. The processing center, as you can see, presents its own set of challenges as well, and that's the fact that the recycle center was constructed with pre-manufactured concrete tilt-up panels. And so the removal of those panels within the facility is cost prohibitive. And so the design you see in front of us was to utilize that existing space, but not necessarily touch those prefabricated walls, adding additional space without removing those walls. A big difference for option A in comparison to option B is that there's a lot of unknowns with option A. And as such, the construction contingency is set as at a higher percentage point. It's based at 30% because of those structural walls.
And Jason, just before you go on, the contingency is included in that cost estimate, yes?
Yes.
Thank you.
So option B in front of you, again, the aqua or green or blue, whatever you want to call it, that represents the retail space. The orange is the processing and the yellow is the back of house again. Option B is a scaled down version, a much smaller remodel of the thrift shop, but focusing the efforts on enhanced processing at the recycle center. Specifically at the thrift shop, this remodel does not remove any structural walls. It includes an additional just under 1,800 square feet of additional retail floor space. And again, the processing is moved to the recycle center. As we've learned through our conversations with thrift staff and our volunteer experts, the product turnover in fresh retail space is instrumental in thrift retail. So option B provides additional processing space to help with receiving those donated goods, getting them organized and categorized so they can be turned over into the main thrift store. The recycle center building largely remains unchanged, but option B includes the addition of a pre-manufactured building adjacent to the recycle center. It's important to note that this proposal remains within the existing footprint of the site. So we did not go beyond the existing asphalt. This increase is approximately 250 square feet in additional processing space. This construction is more straightforward, and so a smaller construction contingency was used at 15%. But again, the estimated cost for construction is at 1.2 mil. So comparing the two costs at a glance, again, option A is at there's a typo in this. It's 1.37, I apologize for that. It includes a 30% contingency, but as you can see the percentage change difference between the retail floor space and the processing space between the two options. Option B is a 1.2 price tag at a 15% contingency, slightly smaller square footage on the retail side, but additional processing space at the recycle center facility. The construction timeframe is slightly different as well. We anticipate 9 months for option A versus 5 months for option B. Again, option B is a more straightforward approach. It's different. It's important to note that both estimates are above the original 807,000 that we identified in June through CIP projects. One of the processes that we will look to do in the next few weeks while staff evaluates these options is we also will look for additional funding on where we can make up this difference. I have some thoughts on that, but I need to talk with our finance team first before I come back to the council, but we'll be prepared to come back to you in October with that update. So our next steps, our thrift staff are reviewing both concepts and are working to develop our donation processing and retail workflows to inform the estimates on the retail revenue. It's important to note that our production spaces are going to be different. No matter if we decide to move forward with these projects or stay status quo, in order for us to start the donation processing, we're going to have to utilize 2 facilities in order to accommodate the space requirements. The benefit to that is we get to pilot this 2-building operation first to see if it's successful and work out some of those kinks. Operations need continuous improvement to continue to fine tune them, and this will give us a good opportunity to try that out. It's important to note that we are going to need our volunteers. We desperately need volunteers to help with this operation. I will say that a survey will be going out to our volunteers near the end of the week to try and help organize that event and see if we can gauge some additional interest in supporting this operation. We continue to work to expand our thrift shop hours. Again, we hope to do that in mid-October, and hopefully we'll be collecting donations in the near future as well. In October, staff expects to return to the council with a return on investment conversation. Again, thrift shop staff and our local volunteer experts are working through these operational scenarios, and we'll plug this into the model and come back to the council with, where we can see the return on investment and what it will be for both scenarios. With that, our team is here to answer questions and facilitate discussion.
So Jason, why don't you stop sharing real quick?
So we have a question from Councilmember Rosenbaum.
Thank you. Jason, do you have a sense as to the timeline for accepting new donations? I know a lot of people have things stockpiling in their homes, and I think it'd be good to kind of give people a heads up.
Good question. I myself tried to drop off donations at Goodwill this week, and I was met with a 3-hour delay in the line to drop off goods. So I know we're all in that situation. We're working on it. We're hopeful that we can do it. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but hopefully in the next month we should have a plan in place and a more realistic time frame for you. But again, we need 2 facilities, need some manpower. We need to get some kinks worked out before we start implementing it.
Yeah, so I know we talked about this before, but I think to the extent that we can kind of give people information about how to pre-sort things, and be good things that we think we can sell versus we don't think we can sell.
Jason, if I could
Absolutely.
just jump in real quick. I'm not sure if we explicitly said this in the presentation, but we are looking at using the community center for events, donation events, because we currently have the space available. It allows us to take in a much larger volume of goods at once using hopefully the many volunteers that will raise their hand to come and help safely. And then it allows us space to hold, because under the COVID pandemic, we have to hold donations for a number of days before we can sort them again. And so just to reiterate, this is something that we probably would have had to do anyway after working through all the COVID-19 rules. So that's the plan. And it will certainly give us a lot of experience on what a 2-building operation looks like, experience that we don't necessarily have right now. So we're looking to get going next month. And we have talked a lot about a robust marketing campaign because we know what's happening at our sister thrift shops around the region. The lines are backed up and there's a lot of goods that we just can't accept right now. So lots of work happening behind the scenes to roll that out. And I assure you a strong marketing campaign will be forthcoming.
Great. Deputy Mayor Weicker.
Yeah, thanks for that presentation, Jason. How confident are you in these numbers? Because everything I know from construction projects is the number is actually usually higher and the timeline's usually longer. So could you speak to your confidence in the stability of this estimate?
Sure. So I'll take a first crack at it, and then I'm actually going to ask Jerry to step in and answer that as well. But I will say, this is a 30% conceptual estimate, right? And so as you design a project, your numbers get tighter as you go towards a bidding climate. Now, I will say the numbers are, I expect Jerry to get on here and say the numbers are what the numbers are. And but there's a but to it, and that is we are starting to see an opportune bidding climate at this time. And so you may recall a few public works projects that have been in front of you lately where the engineer estimate has been high and the lowest responsive bid has actually been under the engineer estimate, as well as some of the other bids. And so I think that's indicative of the climate in which we're in right now, which is a good thing for us. But I will let Jerry talk to the numbers specifically. I would say fairly confident in the numbers, but Jerry can talk to that more closely.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce myself, Jerry Osborne. I'm the principal in charge for this project, and I did put the estimates together. And there are two estimates because there are two schemes, Scheme A and Scheme B, and there are a lot more unknowns in Scheme A than in Scheme B. The issue with Scheme A is we're taking out a lot of the interior shear walls, and we have to make up for that structural deficit. And when we change the structural performance of any building by more than 5%, then we're required to bring the entire facility up to current code. That's what kicks us into substantial alterations. And the issue with substantial alterations is that means all code compliance is on the table. That extends to energy code, ADA, which fortunately the thrift shop seems to address fairly well currently. But fire alarm would be another area. Just all your codes become more relevant when you're in substantial alterations. And so I equate that to risk. And so with Scheme A, the risk for higher numbers is higher than in Scheme B. Scheme B for the thrift shop is more of a TI, and it's easier for us to assess those numbers. Also, assessing the work that would be done at the recycling center. And I'd like to sort of correct nomenclature a little bit. I think of what we're proposing in Scheme B as modular construction, not prefabricated construction. And there's quite a difference there, and modular construction can be dressed so it looks like it's site-built construction, but there are a lot of financial advantages to doing work offsite and bringing it. So I just kind of want to clarify that because there is a stigma with prefabricated construction that doesn't necessarily apply to modular construction. Getting back to costs, we've noticed as well, we're in a good bid climate, but I don't like to estimate based on a current bid climate because we don't know what the bid climate's going to be. I think what we need to look at for cost control is trying to assign alternates. We like to assign alternates. Once we establish what we refer to as the maximum allowable construction costs, or MECC, we like to assign alternates on either side of that, and that's how we can control costs during bid. But the danger with alternates is if you don't have money for them, it means you don't get them. So alternates have to be things you can live without. Confidence in the numbers. I do a lot of work at this size. This is a prevailing wage job. It's estimated based on prevailing wage. I have a lot of contractors that I work with on a regular basis that I confer with. So I'm pretty confident that the numbers are in the ballpark, especially for where we are right now. As we learn more, as Jason noted, the contingency comes down some because there's less unknown, and so there's a little bit less risk. Does that help?
Thank you. Councilmember Jacobson.
First of all, I'd like to thank staff for the measured approach to this whole issue. And of course, the critical thing, regardless of how this ends up, is having sufficient volunteers to run and efficient operation. And so in rebuilding that cadre is really, really important. It's good that that's starting out. And I'm also really delighted to hear that we are looking at ways of restoring our inventory, if you want to think of it that way. And hopefully in taking less than 3 hours to drop things off. So I'm sure we can figure that out. I also think that as we get further down the road, we'll have much more clarity in terms of construction cost. And as a contractor, I understand that. I would strongly suggest that if we ever get to a point where we have construction contracts, that we have value engineering clauses in those contracts to enable further savings to be made. And projects like this, in my experience, remodels that my company has done, mainly on larger projects, are very conducive to that sort of methodology. So we're progressing slowly, and we're going to find out more. And I think the both the volunteer growth and ability to analyze the two-step operation and then also add the ROI to it will lead us to make a decision about what we want to do. So I think, I'm very happy that what the staff has done so far on this. I think that they're to be commended.
Thank you. Councilmember Anderall.
Hey, thanks. So I have to say I'm a little bit concerned about why the two options are so close in price. I mean, one seems major and A seems major and B seems a lot less major, and yet the price is not that different except for the contingency. So I don't really understand that fully. The other thing, and that's just a comment, and you can address it or not, or at a later time. But the thing that I'm wondering is, what is the pass fail on this? What are we looking for as realistic revenue estimates to decide whether it's a go or a no go? How are we going to know whether this is smart or not?
Good question. And the piece that we did not have available for you tonight is that operations analysis, the return on investment, because now that we have conceptual designs in play, we've asked our staff, by the way, we started working on this a couple weeks ago, it just wasn't ready to go this evening, to look at how they will process donations under the two scenarios at the recycling center, and certainly to think through how the retail floor will allow them to expand sales. And so that piece, before we get to pass, fail, or yes, no, that is a very important piece that needs to come back to you. That will happen in October. We haven't locked down a date yet, but we'll be back in October. The other thing, council, to keep in mind as we're following up with that additional data is why now, right? Why now? And the answer to that is because operations at the thrift shop are impacted right now. We are not able to operate at full capacity due to the pandemic. And this was a good time to evaluate this remodel that's been discussed for many years. We also have an opportunity to use the community center as a backup processing center on some level for a short period of time, because that facility is also mostly idle at the moment. So there's some timing things here right now. I know that may not influence the yes or no decision, but keep in mind, if we decide we do want to do a remodel, but it's just not now, a future remodel would impact perhaps a fully operating thrift shop. And so we'd have to think about the revenue impacts downstream. So just wanted to keep that in front of everyone as we continue to evaluate these potential projects. There is a timing advantage for considering this now.
The other thing I will add to Jesse's comment or in response to Councilmember Randall's question was, in terms of the two options, I mean, you can take, the thrift shop of option A with the recycle center of option B. You can go back, you can add or mix it up. We were trying to be mindful of the budget, mindful of the body of work that had to be done in the time frame associated to it. And so we You know, as we got into option A in particular and realized there was a lot of structural work that had to be involved with that, and that was going to suck up a lot of the dollars associated with this project. You know, as we said, processing the donations, the goods, or what turnover in the retail stores, what's driving the sales in the thrift shop. And so by just doing option A without looking at the recycle center, it didn't get us there. And so option B was just a way to increase the processing site at the recycle center. But again, they can be interchangeable. If there's council support for us to look at something else tonight, then we can certainly go back to the drawing board and come up with option C or D. But we were trying to be mindful of the time frame and the budget and the original scope in which we were set out to task.
Thanks, Jason. That's helpful.
I can address why the costs aren't as different as you might assume, and that's because we're adding square footage with the modular construction, and that's where that cost differential increases the cost of Scheme B more, and so that's where that differential is. That brings the cost up.
Thank you. Councilmember Neese.
So I wanted, because I've seen the ROI models in their earliest forms, to kind of speak to Councilmember Anderell's question, which is a good question. Naturally, when we started this process, the first place we started was looking at the data of the transactions of the thrift shop to see what was sold, how many units, what types of things, and for how much, and over the years. And so that was trended and analyzed. And we're pretty darn fortunate to have a good team of people collecting a good amount of data out of the thrift shop. So it provides a pretty rich environment for doing modeling. What the ROI is looking at is how many units of things that are sold, and then it's looking at the inputs of the thrift shop in terms of staff resources, fixed costs like insurance, electricity, water, and then the variable costs related to the volume of things that are sold. And as council's aware, at least many on the council are aware, as the thrift shop grew north towards $2 million of revenue, staff came to us with optimizations in operations, suggesting that if they had additional staff, fractional staff to work on production on the sales floor, that they could push sales even further north. What we knew from looking at the models and talking to experts is that an expansion, and in fact, expansion is the wrong word. It's a reclamation of retail space from the existing building envelope. There's no enlargement of the thrift shop building envelope, but reclaiming space from production and allocating it to retail could have a pretty impressive result on the net margin of the operations. So you had a $2 million operation that was selling, X thousands of items each year, and that was spinning off $1 million of profit. But if you were to increase, for example, the sales floor by 37%, you could just linearly look at the sales and say 37% of 2 million would be 750,000. But the model and the economies of scale of growing the business and looking at the product mix give you a more favorable ROI when you grow the operation. You don't need an extra cashier to add 30% to your sales. You may need more people to process goods, but you don't necessarily need the front of house staff. So your cost mix is a little bit more dynamic. Depending on what you sell also changes your labor, and it also changes your margin. So what we learned is that clothing sales are very high margin at the thrift shop, and they're also the largest bulk of donations that we receive. We actually sell those in bulk to Goodwill, or we did up until the pandemic and the shutdown. And so we know that Mercer Island has the capacity to generate the donations to drive the business, but we don't know, and what the council will hear in October is that with, for instance, 37% reclamation of the sales floor, what might that square footage, what might a rethinking of what products are sold, at what pricings, at what volumes, and then what are the additional costs of that ramp up, and then the bifurcation of the operation between two sites, and then a different view of how volunteers are utilized within the pre-production back of the house type view of that model. So I think that, it's a great question. I'm I'm still cautiously optimistic that the ROI is going to be very favorable. It was looking as a matter of a couple of years in some of the early models, so it could be as favorable as a couple year payoff for a remodel in the 1.3 million range. And I think that that's the smart question is, you know, if you're going to invest in the capital facilities to build revenue and drive additional profits, net margin over to YFS services, how long would it be before you've paid that off in such a way as that YFS would benefit? And I think the council is going to be in a good position to make those decisions in October. And I can assure you that the people working on the models are well qualified to do it, and there'll be some great conversations around that. And so I'll just thank Jason and Gareth and Osborne and staff for putting this stuff together, knowing that you know, there's a lot of work to do in terms of trying to evaluate the project, but it's all heading in a direction that sounds very positive to me.
Thank you. We have a lot of hands up. I'm going to take a quick turn. So, Jason, I guess this is probably for you or for Mr. Osborne, but in your, especially with respect to the recycling center, I take it there's space available for the farmers market. I'm not sure what their needs are, but obviously that's a consideration. An easy question. And then I'd like for you to bring back the power slides so I can look again at option A and the recycling center. I guess it didn't really, anyway, if you can bring those two slides so I can see the recycling center under option A and also under option B.
Sure, give me 1 second here. Yes, we are fully aware of the farmers market needs, and we will make sure that we address them through this process. They have a small lean tube off the side of one of the buildings next to the restrooms, and they do utilize some of the space inside the existing recycle center. So we'll work with them to, you know, one, maybe consolidate their stuff a little bit, but two, we'll definitely find a space for them within this remodel. So that's the easy answer. And you said you wanted option A?
Yeah, option A and option B. I'm sorry, I don't want to spend too much. I just wanted to see. It wasn't in our packet, so I just.
Okay, so there's option A. Again, on the recycle center side, you can see this square. The large square here is the.
Is that the base? Is that the concrete base?
Yeah, so that's it's the outside walls, the awning of the facility, and then the smaller square inside is the actual recycle center itself.
Okay, and what is the structure that's immediately above it?
This up here?
Yeah.
I believe that is the trailer, the Christmas.
There's
Okay.
Gareth Reese, Senior Project Manager. A lot of the stuff that's shown there is the dumpsters that are near the existing thrift shop you see on your way in.
Right.
It's also the box truck, I think, is on the up on your sheet, but south in the park, right? Is a box truck that would be necessary to move goods back and forth between the facilities.
Okay, but the key thing is that big square is basically the concrete base.
Yeah, the outline of the orange and yellow space is the existing drip line, if you will, of the actual roof area.
Okay.
We don't have it traced out, but the smaller area in the orange there is inside the existing building, and the plan right portion is inside the existing building.
Jason, it might help if you bring the photo up of the recycling. I think that would
Yeah, if we
help.
go all the way up to the beginning, there's a clear photo, Jason.
Okay. Right. Okay, and then option B, I mean, I guess, just so I can visualize the difference, obviously there's some people have expressed concerns.
Yeah, so again, option B here, the larger orange space you're seeing is that modular construction, which again, would end up looking like conventional construction. It would be on a concrete foundation, a site board concrete foundation. The recycle center you can see in largely its existing format, the boxes plan left are again the dumpster, the box truck backed up against there. But we're leaving the exterior space as exterior, and we're using 2 spaces within the existing building, broken up into back of house and processing.
Got it. Okay. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it. Next, we have Councilmember Jacobson.
And Mayor Wong, if I can just cut in, I wanted to make sure, did we answer your question about farmer's market storage?
You did. I just wanted to get a visual distinction between the 2 options.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilmember Jacobson.
I got my hand down. I already talked.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Weicker.
So yeah, I would just add and request that when we do the ROI analysis in October that we include predictions around COVID impacts to retail, because we know the data from before COVID. What we don't know is sort of the expectations for the post-COVID retail world. So if whoever's doing that analysis could include that projection, I think that would be helpful. And then my question then has to do with volunteers. I'm hearing a lot about this volunteer force that's needed and an army of volunteers. Are we anticipating not having staffing levels in this model? Are we figuring we're going to have a volunteer manager for all these folks? Or could someone involved in this tell me a little bit about what we're thinking in terms of staffing and how those volunteers are going to be used and managed and relied upon to keep this business going?
Sure. At least initially, Deputy Mayor Weicker, our plan is to utilize volunteers to start up the process. We know we're going to have some trial runs. We need to practice and get our systems down. Again, very limited scale operation when we reopen for donations. We think we can use our existing EOC staff, our existing thrift shop staff to do the startup. We need to get some stability before I come back to the council and request funding to recall staffing. And we think we can, to recall staff, excuse me. We think we can do a little more learning before we get there. We have had many people reach out and say, just tell us when you're ready. We're fortunate that we have a robust team of qualified EOC volunteers led by Dave Euler, as you know, to come in and help us establish safety protocols for an operation like this. We know it's doable. So that's the plan. As the operation scales up, I do anticipate we will need to bring staff back. What I don't want to do is leap to we need staff now and everything shuts down again, due to some unforeseen pandemic circumstance and we're in another layoff cycle. So we're being cautious, slow, gradual. We think we can, turn on some aspect of donation processing here, learn a lot about a 2-building operation. And then part of what I'll be talking about in the next presentation is, I see this as an iterative process. You did bring up a point that we need to talk about as we continue to plan for thrift shop recovery and frankly, the recreation division as well. One of the challenges we've had with managing volunteers is there's no staff person dedicated to that work. It's something we add on to everyone else's job, and your staff team will acknowledge we haven't done it well. So as we talk about, recovering those teams and those operations, I think we have to do exactly what you said, make sure that we have the staff horsepower. It could be a volunteer manager to help coordinate those resources more effectively. So that's something we've got our eye on as we start working on those recovery plans. So initially, we're going to go with the team we have, including our EOC team, and we'll see where we go.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Reynolds.
Thank you. Very helpful. Councilmember Neese, very grateful for your description of the model, and I'm very curious to see that when it comes back in October. The big concerns I have with the model are twofold. One is, but from what I would like to see it, I'm not saying it's wrong, I just want to understand it when I do see it. One is, I don't want to be reliant on an assumption that a 37% increase in floor area necessarily results in a 37% increase in sales. And I'd be very curious to know if there's any evidence from other thrift shops or like operations about how sales do vary with floor area. And if we think those sales are going to come in, are they coming from more people or the same number of people buying more stuff? That would be helpful to know to gauge the believability. My second question was about volunteers. I just want to see if I can get clarification. Am I correctly understanding that the reliance on the volunteers is viewed as a transitional effort, or are we going to be reverting to a more volunteer model on a steady state? Because we'd worked very hard to get to a paid staff model. That would be better. Are we going back the other way?
Yeah, I would say both. We're looking to our volunteers to help transition us back to a more stable operation. And I think it's really important to keep the door open for volunteers to play a critical role in our thrift shop operations. I'm curious myself if the challenge we had previously was that we didn't have staff dedicated to managing the volunteer workforce, and we were instead asking our thrift shop leadership, who have many other responsibilities, to also manage, steward, care and feed the volunteer workforce, and that is a reason it was not effective. So absolutely, this is an important, it's an easy operation to incorporate volunteers, and I think we have an opportunity to revisit that approach, and it's my intent to do so in our recovery planning.
Okay, I would ask that in one of the scenarios where you do your ROI analysis, I would love to see an attributed value to that volunteer service, because to the extent that we utilize volunteers that could be doing something else, their time is worth something. I think it's important to consider that as a sensitivity on the ROI where we attribute a cost to them. Next question, one of the advanced questions I had, Jason and Jerry have both gotten at it, but I want to understand a little more detail. We've essentially got two options for the thrift store and two options for the recycle center. And you've confirmed my understanding that we can mix and match, which is great. But the fact that you presented them as two pairs rather than 2 times 2 is 4 suggests to me that maybe you thought in some way that option A kind of belonged together and B belonged together. Could you comment on that? Or was it just a random assignment of one recycle center to design to the one thrift shop design?
I think it's more of option A, more holistically met the conceptual design that was presented to the council in June in terms of both the recycle center and the thrift shop, in terms of what the facilities look like, in terms of the recycle center or the thrift shop opening up the floor space completely, and then the recycle center trying to stay within the existing drip line of the facility. So that's really why it came together, and then from a simplicity standpoint and trying to relay this information in the council packet, just keeping them sort of paired up helped with that conversation. But absolutely, they can be mixed and matched, but that's just how it came together.
Okay, thank you. That helps me understand. I hope that at the next meeting when you present these, that the costs are sufficiently broken down so that we could see the cost of all 4 possible combinations there would be very helpful. And then just last thing, I'll leave with a passing comment. Sorry about the dog barking in the background. That's not my comment. We have a statement in our family, a maxim that we live by, which is that construction projects are like Fahrenheit to metric, or Celsius to Fahrenheit conversions. You got to multiply by 9/5 and add 32 when you're figuring out the eventual cost for the estimate. And if we start with the original 500,000 estimate we have, that's effectively what we've done. So I kind of worry about this, and I worry that there's going to be another Celsius to Fahrenheit conversion on top of the one we have. So it's got me on the edge of my seat, but we'll see what happens.
If I could, Councilmember Reynolds, direct you to the exhibit in the agenda bill. The costs are broken down by facility location there for both option A and option B.
Okay.
And it includes a line item for the modular center as well.
Excellent. Thank you. I may have missed that.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Rosenbaum.
Thanks. Councilmember Reynolds asked a question that I had around are sales coming from more people, more and more people, or the same people buying? Are the same people buying more? Like Craig, I'll apologize for the background noise. But I was also wondering if when the ROI comes back, if we could get some estimate around, if we could get some estimate around if there are additional goods that do we think we can sell 37%? Are we giving away now 37% of things that we think we can actually sell? because if we have space but nothing to sell, it doesn't really help us. So if there's any way to do some analysis around that, I'd appreciate that in October.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Anderall.
Oh, yeah, okay, I'm off mute, great, thank you. Well, Wendy, or Councilmember Weicker, Wendy, raised a good point, and that is, you know, how are we gonna know what people are buying post-pandemic versus pre-pandemic, and what are the patterns? And I know there are a number of thrift shops that have reopened, including Goodwill, and I personally had a 5-minute wait at Goodwill on Dearborn, so I'm sorry about anybody who had a 3-hour wait, but do we have any publicly available data since things have reopened that we can access? I mean, I realize it's going to be short term, it's going to be maybe 3 months worth of information, but is there anything that we can use to model off of what our expectations might be?
So we work with the local retail stores. We have a good relationship established with them. So we can check. I don't know off the top of my head, but we will definitely check and bring it back the next meeting.
Although I won't say this is, you know, it's data, right? We've been open for Sunday sales, and I've been pretty impressed. We exceeded my expectations. We've had a steady line. We can't do the volume in the store that we were doing before, but we're doing a good volume right now. I think it's worth it for us to get to that next phase where we may be adding another day or two of sales and starting to process donations to really get a handle on at least our local trend. You know, we are a different type of thrift shop operation. We don't necessarily compare equally to Goodwill. I think you've heard my colleagues reference our thrift shop as a boutique thrift shop, and people drive from all over because rumor is we have good inventory. So we'll do our best to share with you our recent experiences through our one-day sales, and certainly keep the council informed as we go forward. And we are fortunate to be connected with a couple volunteers in our community right now with a retail and thrift industry expertise, and they are helping us considerably, as Councilmember Neese mentioned earlier, in developing and updating the ROI. So we'll bring back all that data, and I think I will say, you know, we're all, you know, doing our best to project the pandemic impacts, and we'll likely be wrong. So hopefully we're making progress towards a vaccine and all those other important things, but the timing, you know, it's anyone's best guess right now.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Weicker.
I'll just close on that note and just say, given the budget headwinds we're facing and the lack of a crystal ball, I'd like us to consider option C, which is status quo. So as we get back to this in October and November and get better numbers and a better sense of the model for the ROI, if we could also get a sense of what status quo might look like for reopening, Jesse, especially in light of the budget, I think that might be helpful to keep in mind that while this might be a great time to do remodel, it might not be a great time to do a remodel. So if we could just keep option C as status quo, like we were doing pretty well before pandemic, we might do okay in down the future, but given all the uncertainty in the world, status quo might be pretty good right now. I don't know.
And I'll just clarify that my approach to a status quo assessment would be based on our limited sales right now and needing to rely on a second building for processing. If we go back to the thrift shop for processing, we slow down considerably. We just don't have the space right now under the pandemic restraints. So I'm not even really able to model if we were to try to use our processing area. It would be very limited. But I'd be happy to share more about what we would predict, at least in this transition period, if that's helpful.
I think that might be helpful if everybody agrees. I don't want to give you more work, but it just seems like if we don't go ahead, what does it look like as is for the next couple of years, perhaps?
Yeah. And at the risk of stating the obvious, there's going to be a point here where we cross over because the community center will come back online, and that's the building we're going to rely on at least short term for some backup processing for the thrift shop. So we have lots of moving parts behind the scenes, but we'll put together something for you to react to at the next council meeting.
Thank you.
Councilmember Andrew, you have your hand up, or is that a leftover?
That's an old one. I'll take it down.
Okay, Councilmember Rosenbaum.
Yeah, real quick, in case there's anyone watching or if the reporter's going to cover this, if someone's interested in volunteering who hasn't volunteered before, where should they go? Who should they reach out to?
Yeah, we'll be putting out official call for volunteers. I think, Jason, that's going out in the relatively near term, and it will explain how to get signed up and all that good stuff. So I will also make sure to include it in my next city manager's report, which will be the first meeting in October.
I'm going to take the liberty of, I guess, having the last question here. And so, Jesse, as far as I think everybody's very much interested in the ROI. And so I assume, I use that word. I presume that there's going to be a number of assumptions in that ROI so that we can challenge them or understand how the ROI was developed.
It's a model.
Okay, and so we'll have all the assumptions laid out. Okay, and then the other question really is a timing question. You've always talked in terms of go, no go. Is that coming up, and when is that likely to come up now? We're at 30% design, and so.
So we're not proceeding any further with design at this point. We need to complete the operations analysis, so that will be back to you in October. And I would recommend for timing that we make a decision relatively quickly thereafter. Certainly, council, I want to keep the door open if you have questions or additional analysis that's needed. What I'm thinking about right now is, by June, we're talking about trying to have some programming back online for the community center. We may be able to go earlier than that. Just again, depends on a whole bunch of things we don't know yet with pandemic. So we need to be, getting a go decision. We then have to finish our design work and get out to bid. It would be optimal to be out to bid, right at the first of the year. That's typically when a number of contracts go to bid so that we're first in line, or even possibly by the end of the year, although I'm sure Jerry's furrowing his eyebrows about my fast timelines. So somewhere in there, we want to be out to bid early part of 2021. The construction isn't particularly challenging depending on if we get into, big structural changes at the thrift shop. But most of the other construction is actually relatively, well, no, I'm not even going to say it. It's a little more straightforward.
Okay, so you're looking at maybe the second meeting in October?
We haven't set an October meeting date yet. I need to, we're getting into budget season, so I need to give Jason and Gareth and their team time to finish the analysis and then really find the right complement of meeting agenda items to bring this back.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to get a sense of expectation for the public and for the council. Okay, so that's fine. I don't see any everybody's hand up. So if that's the case, certainly want to thank Gareth and Jason and Mr. Osborne for the presentation. And I think at that point, we can now move to the second item of our special business. First of all, does anybody have a show of hands? We want to go ahead, keep going. Okay, well, okay. At least I wasn't sure, is that a keep going? Yes, okay, well, we're gonna, okay, very good, all right. So now we move to our second item of special business, Agenda Bill 5755, 2021-2022 organizational change. Council, I just wanted to say that the former law partner of mine always signed off his email with Carpe Diem, Latin for seize the day. While there are very few things good about this pandemic and its impact, it is important to seize and embrace the opportunities that the pandemic has created. During the next few months, as we discuss the city's biennium budget, it will be important for the council and for the city staff to focus upon how we can best serve the island and how best to provide services going forward in this new normal. I applaud the city manager and her entire leadership team for seizing this opportunity now to see how the city's organizational structure might be changed to best serve the needs of our community in our new normal. City Manager, we look forward to your presentation and to tonight's discussion. No action is required by this council relative to this agenda bill. We're here tonight to receive the report. However, as a quick reminder to the council regarding the possible new positions that are identified in the proposed reorganization, we'll have time when we start talking about the budget next month to discuss whether or not such positions should be part of the city's reorganizational structure. At that time, we'll have budgeted dollars assigned to those positions so that we can make a more informed decision. With that, I'm going to welcome City Manager Jesse Baum.
Thank you very much, Mayor Wong. Council, you had a chance to already preview the PowerPoint presentation. You know that it's incredibly lengthy. It is not my intent to go through all of the text on every slide tonight. I provided that since we were publishing it in advance for context. Give me just a moment here to share my screen. All right, everyone can see that, yes? Okay, so just to start off, a reminder, oftentimes the city manager will do some sort of a budget preview. In this case, we've had so many changes in 2020 and the organizational structure has changed so much. I wanted to get a chance to talk to you before the budget is released and walk through what I am proposing. I figured if we didn't do it this way, we would spend our first budget meeting understanding my proposed organizational changes. For anybody that might be watching at home, and I did receive a few emails on this, at this point, this is the city manager's recommendation to the city council. So the city council is receiving this for the first time and will be deliberating on my recommendation and ultimately adopting a budget in December. We have at least 4 council meetings dedicated to these policy discussions. Council, as a reminder, we are, I hope, on track to publish the budget and provide it to you on October 1st, and then your first budget meeting is October 13th. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. Just a few key themes I wanted to make sure we're all aware of. We are an organization in transition. We've had a very challenging year, workforce reductions, we've had financial challenges. Many services are still impacted by the pandemic. We've had to modify really everything we do. And I'm approaching this budget fairly conservatively because there are still financial uncertainties as we look out to the next biennium. What you'll be receiving in your preliminary budget reflects all of the changes that have happened in 2020. So it's a modified organizational structure, also reduced. We have reduced the number of staff members that we have working for the city of Mercer Island as compared to prior years. But I want to emphasize this is a dynamic time, and I fully acknowledge that we may continue to evolve, and we should, frankly. We have 2 teams in particular that are still in transition. So I expect additional changes as we progress through the next biennium. I already said this, so I'll just say it again. Every city service, everything we do, the way we do business has been impacted by the pandemic. Public access to our buildings is still limited. We actually aren't allowing public into the building at all. And we won't be reopening our buildings until we get to phase 3 per the governor's orders. And full restoration of in-person services is not anticipated until King County reaches phase 4. That's kind of the anticipated return to normal time. That is out somewhere in 2021, hopefully not 2022, but again, as I was saying during the previous presentation, a lot is unknown right now. Just a reminder, we do have a workforce that is still reporting in person, public safety and maintenance personnel, although we've adapted all their operations to accommodate COVID-19 safe practices. I didn't include in here, but our municipal court did reopen about a month ago as well. And all other personnel are at remote locations. So just a a good reminder of where we are at this moment in time. As I began working on the budget, some really important key themes emerged in terms of the organizational structure itself. Certainly, continuing to prioritize delivery of essential services, which, by the way, as a city, we haven't clearly defined or redefined lately. I'll show you a slide on how I describe this in just a minute. Providing stability for the organization, certainly, as you can imagine, and this should also say for the community, we've had so many changes. The staff want to know, where are we headed? They certainly want to know what their departments and teams will look like and what the job structure will be in the next 2 years. That's not to say that we're also not continuing to focus on continuous process improvement and efficiency. And what I'm pleased to say is that the pandemic forced our hand in terms of modifying some practices very quickly, some things that have been queued up for years. One of the best examples is allowing credit card payments now for permits of any size. That was a big change. Internally, some of the things you don't see very often are, we're able to move documents now and do electronic signatures on nearly everything. You might be surprised to learn that wasn't in play at the beginning of this year. So we're continuing to make strides. A key theme, and I'm going to really be talking about this as we get to the end of the presentation, is I am focusing a lot on operations and infrastructures and recommending that we infuse resources into our capital projects team. This is where many of my recommendations for new positions come from. I am concerned that we're not investing enough resource into stewarding our critical systems, our sewer system, our water system, our stormwater systems, roads, and even parks. The other thing I'll be talking about a little bit tonight, and certainly as we get into the budget presentation, is succession planning. We have a couple of teams in particular where we have near-term retirements that we need to be planning for right now. Key teams are fire, police, and our public works teams, particularly engineering and our capital project managers. This was a message to the staff, and I will share it with you, council, as well. We are still transitioning, and I encourage you all to remain flexible. I'm remaining flexible. Circumstances and community needs will continue to change and evolve, and we need to adapt. And finally, Mayor Wong, beat me to the punch here. As I've reflected on this past year and the challenges that we've faced, at times my mind wanders to a very negative place. But if you sit down and think about all the opportunities this year has presented us, there's quite a long list. In fact, I did an exercise with the staff at an all-staff meeting on Thursday, and I had more than 120 comments on things that have gone well this year, things we've learned, and the way we've grown as an organization. So there's a lot of positivity in where we are at now, and I'm encouraging you, I'm encouraging the staff team, and I'm certainly going to lead us this way. Let's embrace where we're at and carry that positive momentum forward.
Jessica, can I, before you?
Sure.
Why don't you go back to the previous slide? Yeah, I'm just curious whether or not any council member has any questions regarding the themes that the city manager is using in developing the reorganizational structure. Councilmember Rosenbaum and then Councilmember Anderl.
Thanks. Jesse, were there any conversations with staff about sort of what they see as strengths, the weaknesses, and opportunities?
Thousands. We started working on an organizational restructure over a year ago. We knew that our financial circumstances were leading towards perhaps what happened this year, although maybe not in quite the manner in which it happened. So we've been working on transitions for the past 12 months.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Anderl.
Yeah, I had one or two comments from some community members about this last bullet point, and I think I read it differently than they did, but sees the opportunity for us to grow and evolve. And some folks said, well, grow means restore personnel, add people, become a bigger city government. And I personally interpreted it as substitute the word mature for grow. to kind of just refine our service model. I'm just wanting Jessie to maybe clarify a little bit what she meant with, did grow mean get bigger?
No. Let's be honest. It doesn't mean get bigger. It mostly means, learn. What have we learned? And that was one of the conversations that I had with the staff on Thursday. I asked them the question, what have you learned from this past year? I'll give you an example. It's one I go to a lot. We have learned that, retail sales is maybe not always a stable revenue source. And so how are we going to take that lesson and carry it forward when we're thinking about long-term stability for the YFS fund? At a minimum, what it means for me is that we need a reserve fund. So as we're looking at recovery, growth, learning, evolving, we have to harness these lessons we've learned, in some cases a very hard way, and apply that to our practices, not just our operational practices, but our budget policies as well. So that's what I meant by that statement.
That's kind of what I suspected, and that's perfect. And I see growth in some of the things you've done to consolidate, like Parks and Rec maintenance into Public Works. And it's maybe not growing either of those departments, but it's growing in terms of maturing the service delivery model. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
I'm great with that.
Absolutely. And I want to go back to Councilmember Rosenbaum's question about the staff. One of the things I shared with the team on Thursday is to make sure that as we go forward, every team member of this city has learned something and has something to contribute about where we're going. And I challenge the team to stay engaged, right? This isn't just a city manager-driven process. This is all of us, including the council, the board and commissions, the community, and even our volunteers, helping to shape the city. This isn't a negative comment, but I feel like we're on the ground floor, and we get to go up together now, and we can see that as a negative, but I see it as a positive. I really see this as a positive opportunity to take this moment and really be thoughtful about how we recover and come back from what has happened in 2020, and we're already on our way.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, can I just add, I want to make sure my question was clear. I agree with you that I think this is a real opportunity to grow. What I meant was, what feedback have we gotten from staff around, how do we do that? Sort of what they've seen in the past and what they think will work better in the future. I wasn't suggesting that this was sort of a status quo issue.
That's a pretty open-ended question. I'm not sure we have time to go through all of that. I will, as I'm presenting on the organizational structure, I have immediate feedback that I've received from the staff. I'll be happy to share where they have thoughts or concerns about what I've proposed.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Jesse, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Let's see here.
I think we were on slide 6, essential services, yeah.
All right. This is a slide I shared, you may recall, back in the spring when I was doing weekly video updates to the community. I had several people ask, Jesse, how do you define essential services? And, we went back through budget policies, and there's some old policy where we talked about the priorities of government, but essentially this was my list. And council, if at some point you want to revisit your priorities of government policy, we should do that. But essentially, what I'm prioritizing right now is we do have an ongoing emergency response related to the pandemic, and we are an important resource to our community. Not to mention, we have to keep government services going. So that is certainly at the top of the list. Also, critical essential service, public safety, roads, ensuring safe transportation, utilities, mental health services, which is something unique to our city. Not all cities, most cities don't offer that service. Municipal court. And then you note here, I have parks and planning noted as limited. We are stewarding our parks infrastructure, but we have stood down our recreation programming and our special events and our community center, things like rentals. Those are not necessarily essential, although I do believe fundamentally they're important to a good quality of life. Our planning department is operational, really focusing right now on permit processing. We have largely suspended long-range planning and policy work, and that's something that council, we need to talk about how that comes back. And then to keep all of those functions going, we have an internal support team that's really critical. HR, our technology folks, certainly the finance department has been really taxed heavily, no pun intended, this year. Communications, legal, and the teams that keep our buildings going as well. So that is how I describe essential services. All right, let's move on to the next few slides, and I will have an opportunity for another break here. So big picture, and whoops, for those of you at home, let me move some things around so you can see this graphic. This is a citywide org chart. I apologize, we have a typo in there. It says 2021 to 2020. That should actually be 2022. Key things that have changed, and I'll be talking about in just a moment. We have a new administrative services team, or an administrative services department that now includes human resources, IT and GIS, centralized customer service function, and the youth and family services department reports up through this structure. The administrative services function was in process well before the pandemic. We had a number of department heads leave, and this is the position that Ali Speets holds. And so we had already started making this change, and we've continued to work through that during the pandemic. The other big change that's happened, and this is something we really need to spend time on at the end of tonight, is a number of functions have moved to Public Works, what I'm now calling Public Works / operations. And that happened partly because of the pandemic. So park maintenance, with part of the Parks and Rec Department shutting down temporarily, we moved park maintenance over to Public Works. We've had facility support services also moved to Public Works. And I'm also proposing through this budget, moving development review engineering to Public Works, which I'll explain a little bit later. It's a consolidation of all of our engineers and capital project staff into one team. So this is a snapshot of what the org structure looks like now, as proposed, I should say, to clarify. The question that I get right out of the gates is, where's our FTE count? And I do want to apologize, Council. We discovered, actually, I will give credit, Councilmember Neese discovered an error. We had transposed a number in the table that went out in the packet. So I believe what we put out under community planning and development said that in 2020 we had 29.4 staff. It was actually 24.9. So I've corrected it here. The numbers that changed are just noted in yellow. And when Deb Estrada, our city clerk, publishes the link to this presentation, she will publish the link to this one so that the corrections are available to the public. Actually, so before I skip over this slide, let me just point out that total FTE count in 2020 was 215. Proposed in 2021, it's 186.5, and so we're down 28.5. We attempted, and I want to put a big asterisk on this slide, we attempted to break down the positions by fund. So this is how the positions are funded. And I will tell you, this is where things are changing fairly routinely. So for example, a capital project manager may bill part of their time to the utility fund, part of their time to the capital fund, and part of their time to the general fund. So we went through the preliminary budget, and actually I give credit to Ali, she worked on this to try to show the splits across the fund. This may change a little bit between now and when the budget's released. And I will tell you, Council, this is often changing in the background. When we are moving staff based on needs, they often move between funds. The other thing is we have a lot of staff that are their time is split across multiple funds. So that's how you get all those numbers with like 1.55. So more on that later. I just wanted to show that we've at least done the preliminary analysis, and this will certainly be something we can talk about as we get into the budget. And the thing I want to call your attention to is in the general fund, where we've had lots of financial challenges. My proposal has us down 20 FTEs. This does not include the positions that I'll talk about in a minute that are shown in purple that you may ultimately choose to fund when we get into budget policy discussions. So this is just based on the preliminary recommendation from the city manager, includes the positions I've identified in gold as new or restored, but not the ones in purple. Okay, I'm gonna keep going because there is a natural break coming up here in just a minute. So I jumped ahead here. The legend for the graphics that I'm gonna show in just a minute. The positions in blue are current or existing positions. They were funded previously and are proposed to continue. One of the questions I get all the time is what positions are vacant? So we put a little yellow star where we've got existing or current vacancies. I was just mentioning the positions in gold. So this budget does include a recommendation to add new positions or to restore positions that were eliminated in 2020. And the positions that are in purple are positions that I have not included in my budget proposal as funded yet, but they are shown on an optional list, and I fully expect the City Council to evaluate those and consider funding. Green is just, we've had some things move to contract, and so we wanted to note where that's happened. The little box that says EOC, that's the shorthand for Emergency Operations Center. And I plug this in just to give you an idea of where we will still have key team members, based on my best guess right now, still supporting emergency operations work related to the pandemic. And I kind of arbitrarily said, if this position has the potential to work more than 25% on EOC work, I've labeled it. That could certainly change. I know in our fire department, for example, right now, their EOC work has dropped down. So that's what that means. And then finally, I think it's important to remember that we have a number of positions that are represented by collective bargaining agreements. And I put little tiny white diamonds that you can probably barely see on those positions, just for your reference. So Council, I just noted this, and I wanna go over this again because we did receive some emails since this packet went out. The city manager's recommended staffing levels in the 2021 preliminary budget really largely reflect what we're doing right now, with a few changes. And those position changes are noted in that gold or yellow color shown during the presentation. I do intend to spend some time talking about what those are and why they're there. Those positions are included in the preliminary budget. A number of other potential positions are identified for funding consideration and subject to feedback and final direction from you. I think it's important, Council, with this type of budget, with this amount of change, that positions that aren't necessarily needed to perform the essential functions of the city are included for your consideration, but that I'm not necessarily making the final decision. We did receive some emails yesterday and today concerned about the sustainability manager position. I suppose the unintended consequence of me structuring the budget this way is that it looks like I was intending to defund sustainability, and I wasn't. I'm actually recommending that we break the position split apart and you consider funding a full-time position. There are certainly variables. Maybe it's not a full-time position. Maybe it's a half-time position. Maybe you have some other ideas. My preview, and I'm getting a little ahead of our finance department, is that when the budget's presented to you, there will be about $700,000, give or take, it's an estimate right now, in ongoing annual savings that you will then have an opportunity to apply to fund, one or more of these positions, or consider the funding for something else. So I'm getting ahead of myself because I said we weren't going to do budget numbers tonight, but I at least wanted to give you a preview of what you can expect in those next budget meetings. Okay. One other thing, and I know this is something, an issue that's been raised previously, is contract positions. So the preliminary budget we're making a change in terms of how contract positions are used. Contract positions are limited term equivalents. So they're referred to in this graphic as LTEs, and they're really for short-term assignments. The city has been using contract positions or LTEs across multiple biennia, and this is not a best practice. LTEs and FTEs have the same benefits. You know, one of the policy, we have a policy in place that basically says when there's workforce reductions, contract positions will be considered for reduction before an FTE. And one of the things that we ran into this year is that we had people in contract positions that had been there for 6 years. And that's not a contract position. That really is an FTE. Again, there's no difference in cost, there's no difference in benefits. So we're making a correction, and this is both for transparency to you, council, to the community, and certainly for transparency to our staff as well. So going forward, we will only recommend a short-term classification or an LTE when we truly have a short-term assignment, which is probably 2 years or less within the biennium, or that position is tied to grant funding. We do have a handful of positions in the YFS department, for example, that are tied to grants. I think they're mostly 4-year grants. So we've tried to call those out. I wanted to recommend, I wanted to explain my recommendation to make a change in the way we're classifying positions. Okay, so this is what I'd like to do, council. Now that we've got through all those intro slides, I'd like to walk through all 3 departments that have very few changes and then pause there for questions. I don't think it's worth it to go department by department through this section. So let's start. I'll get through municipal court, police, and fire, and then I'll stop screen sharing and we'll do Q&A. Municipal court. So the way this slide deck was built, and again, I'm not going to go through all of this in detail, is we first show a functional slide so that you know what that team or that department is working on. In this case, our municipal court does civil and criminal case processing. And then the slide deck follows with, I can see my little screen here is going to be in the way for people watching at home, the actual staffing structure. And up in the right-hand corner there, what that is it shows the number of FTEs that are approved or proposed in the budget, and then the number of actual employees in the position. So in this case, we have 3.5 FTEs in the municipal court, but actually 4 individuals filling these positions. So no change from the previous budget to 2021. I will mention we had court staff furloughed for a short time in the spring when the municipal court was shut down. They've all been recalled. Something else I will put on your radar, this is something you might want to consider including in the work plan for next year. Our municipal court judge, the contract is effective through the end of 2021. I have not spoken with Judge Stewart prior to this presentation, but it is my assumption that he may be considering retirement. And council, one of the things that you've raised previously is should we be evaluating whether or not to outsource our contract for municipal court services. If we were going to consider that as a work item, I would certainly recommend we do that in 2021 to align with the timing of our current judge's contract. So nothing changed here. Fire department, again, council, you can't see this at home, but I drive the computer that everyone, the screen that everyone's seeing at home, so I have to move around the little box based on what's on the screen. So fire department by function, again, you've got kind of 4 broad categories of work: administration, operations, which is certainly our fire team, community risk reduction, and training. Again, no changes proposed in 2021. I did note that our deputy fire chief, and sometimes our fire chief, they trade off quite a bit, are participating in the EOC and supporting that part of our operation right now. So we will continue to rely on those resources as the pandemic continues. Something to have on your radar, and I mentioned this at the beginning, is that 9 fire department personnel are eligible to retire in the next biennium. No retirement dates are confirmed. It's important that we keep this in mind, though, because filling vacant firefighter positions can take, up to 12 months and largely depends on availability of the fire academy. Oftentimes, we don't have enough notice to get somebody through the academy and into a position. And so I'm just mentioning this. This is sometimes where your overtime hours come in so that we can maintain minimum staffing levels. I think one of the things that we need to continue to evaluate for both police and fire is higher head options. It's not always possible to do so, but when we have advance notice of retirement, it certainly makes sense to begin the process so that we can fill the seat and do whatever we can to cut down on overtime costs. All right, a couple more slides and then I'll take a break. The police department, again, you'll see the functional org chart I included in your packet, not intending to go through it in detail. The police department is broken up into three primary areas: work areas, operations, services, and training. I think these functional org charts are really important because it reminds us of all the things that are going on, both externally and internally, and some things we may not always be aware of. The organizational chart, sorry, hang with me while I make an adjustment. Again, no changes recommended in my preliminary budget to you, City Council. I will note, however, that on your list of positions to consider for funding is up to 2 additional patrol officers. And I'm including this on your list of position considerations because previously, in 2019 and in early 2020, we talked about the need to potentially evaluate our police resources for when the light rail station opens here on the island, which is anticipated for 2023. So as a reminder, and I'll show you this slide in a minute, we also have a long lead time, usually 12 to 18 months to fill a patrol officer position. If we have any interest in funding those positions in 2023, we would need to consider budgeting for them in 2022 to make sure we have enough lead time to hire them. So what I'm showing here at the top of the screen is those numbers in blue are what's existing and what's proposed, so no change, 35 and a half FTEs, which is 36 individuals working for our police department currently. And with the 2 potential positions proposed but not yet funded, that would bring the department to 37 and a half FTEs and a total of 38 employees. I think I've already covered this slide for the most part, except for saying that there are 10 Mercer Island Police Department personnel that are eligible to retire in the next biennium. Similar to the fire department, we don't have retirement dates. We stay in touch with our staff and have a sense of who might be considering it. But it's something that we really need to keep an eye on. And as I already said, be mindful of hire ahead options. One thing that's important to know about the police academy is that we cannot reserve a spot for the academy until we've done our hiring process and have a name. So we have to go through the whole process, submit a name, and sometime that academy is 3, 4, 5, 6 months out from the time that we do the hiring. So there's a pretty considerable time factor included in all of this. So what I think I'll do right now then, Council, is pause and ask if you have any questions about municipal court, fire, or police. And I will mention I have Fire Chief Heitman and, Police Chief Holmes available as well.
Thank you. We have a question. Councilmember Reynolds has been waiting patiently.
Well, sort of patiently. Could you go back to the slide that recaps the staff headcount by department?
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, that one's perfect. I have 2 questions about this. The first one is, can you just clarify what the 2020 column means? I'm thinking it's 2020 original budget and not current headcount after we've had our massive post-COVID headcount cuts. Is that correct? I
believe that's correct, yes.
Okay. Second question is, you talk a little bit about the LTEs. Is that intended to be included in that? Would that include your seasonal labor like you have in the parks in the summertime?
No, there is a difference. An LTE is a full-time professional that's working for a short duration, but working full-time generally. Seasonals are not included in this count.
Okay. And one of the things we've certainly seen in the last few months is problems with trash pickup and parks maintenance due to loss of seasonal labor. Do you envision providing a budget where we'll bring back the seasonal labor for 2021?
Yeah, I'll be getting to that at the end of the presentation.
Okay, I'll wait patiently for that then. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Rosenbaum.
See, for the expected retirements or sort of unknown retirements, is there any best practice around offering some sort of incentive to give us some more clarity around this? I mean, it seems like we end up kind of paying for this one way or the other, whether it's overtime. Actually, I have no idea. I'm just curious if you've seen anything like that.
Best practice? Nah, I'm not sure there's a manual on how to deal with this. One of the things that we talked about as recently as today is would there be an opportunity to offer some sort of an incentive for an advanced retirement notice, right? We're not asking people to retire, we're just asking for a notice that gives us time to do the recruitment and fill their vacancy. And the answer to that is maybe. Maybe it would be something we would need to talk with the bargaining groups about. And I mean, literally Chief Holmes and I just had this conversation at about 4:15 today. I'm sure there's other cities that have wrestled with this, and there's some other options we could explore. I'll remind you, we're under contract right now with an outside firm to assist us with bargaining. And so I think what I'll ask is for Ally to cast this question out to them and see if they have any recommendations.
Thanks. I'd love to hear more when we have a better idea.
Okay. I don't see anybody else's hands are up, so I guess go ahead, Joseph.
All right. So the next category of changes, we're getting into a little more movement here. I think what I'll do is probably take a break, particularly after the Admin Services Department. And I think the others are a little more straightforward. And let's get my slide to move here. Whoops. Okay, the City Attorney's Office, again, this is the functional org chart, just a reminder. They provide general legal services and defense for us, oversee our prosecution contracts, and you may not be aware of this, but the City Attorney's Office does oversee and manage our public records requests. Our paralegal spends at least half of our time on public records requests, sometimes more. If she's watching, she's probably saying, Jesse, it's way more than that. Our city clerk, Deb Estrada, also provides support for public records requests. And this is a good example of how positions are actually split, because part of Deb Estrada's time is actually billed to the City Attorney's Office for public records support. So this is January 2020. This is a snapshot of the beginning of the year in terms of what we had budgeted. We had 3 FTEs budgeted. We had the city attorney position filled with an interim city attorney. The assistant city attorney position was vacant as of June 2019, and it remained vacant going into this year. We have a full-time paralegal who also serves as our public records officer. So council, one of the questions you've asked is, explain to me what changed. And I'll tell you, Ally Speets, and a huge thanks to her, she helped put this presentation together, and there was so much change in 2020 that the easiest thing for us to do was to snapshot moments in time. So the snapshot we've given you for the departments that changed is January 2020, September 2020, and then 2021. I hope you can appreciate that spending more time on all the movement I didn't think was going to produce a good return on investment. All right, so since this time with a vacant assistant city attorney, we have been using outside legal counsel to support our legal team. And, oh, I forgot, Ally has all sorts of fun animation in this presentation. So where we are in 2021 and what I'm proposing is actually to eliminate the assistant city attorney FTE and continue contracting with outside legal counsel. This model is working for us. We have used it previously. Cities do all variation here. Some contract out exclusively, some do what we're doing, which is a bit of a hybrid model. And other cities retain, a number of attorneys on staff. What I will say is I like having a city attorney that serves as general counsel for the city and then relying on a number of outside firms and outside legal counsel to represent us in specialty matters. As you know, counsel, we are working with anywhere from probably 5 or 6 different legal firms right now, depending on the issue. We have specialists we work with on HR matters. We have specialists we work with on claims, particularly things to do with our utilities, and others. So given that it's working, we're proposing to continue this model. It does reduce the FTE count, but it's a budget neutral change because we have rebudgeted all of those funds to support outside legal counsel. I suppose that there may be a time in our future when our legal needs will decrease and we would realize some savings. And I hope we can also recognize there are times when our legal needs exceed our budget, and as we've had to do recently, we have to seek additional funding. Let me get through the city manager's office and a couple more slides and then we'll take a break. City manager's office, again, the functional org chart. I think you have a pretty good sense of how my team spends our time, certainly supporting you, city council, and implementing your policies. I do oversee most of the city operations, not directly, indirectly, intergovernmental work and legislative work. The city clerk reports to me, and then we do have special projects that often fall within my purview. So we have had some changes in the city manager's office, and this is a January 2020 snapshot. Up in the right there, we're not counting the department heads here because they're counted, their FTEs are counted within their departments or teams. So at the beginning of 2020, we had 3.8 FTEs, a total of 4 employees. I will mention that senior project manager position, which I think you can see my cursor. This was Kirsten Taylor's position, and she was working specifically on Sound Transit related matters and the Tully's mixed-use development project. And at the beginning of the year, we had a vacant human resources director position, and I had already moved the Parks and Rec department under Public Works. One of the challenges, I'm just going to be honest, is the number of direct reports to the city manager. When Julie Underwood left, there was even one more, and we've made a move. So that's something I'm really mindful of. My ability to directly supervise all of these people, and that was one of my goals in some of the reorganization this year, was to reduce the number of direct reports to me. So the September 2020 snapshot, which is now, I will remind you, we've had a couple of workforce reductions this year, the YFS director, the interim Parks and Rec director. The human resources director position is still technically vacant, although we've done a reclassification. And then with Kirsten Taylor's retirement, we did, through an internal restructure, retain a half-time senior project manager to continue supporting the Sound Transit work. And that is not just specific to the settlement agreement, but it's all of the projects within the settlement agreement, including managing invoicing and things like that. So the head count without the department directors, and remember they're being counted elsewhere, has gone down from 3.8 FTEs to 3.5. That's mostly because of the change in that senior project manager position. So let's take one more slide. So looking ahead, again, the slide I showed you previously was September 2020, and this is the look ahead to what's in your budget. I'm going to talk just a minute. I'll talk in a few minutes about the Chief of Administration and Chief of Operations positions. Those are new job titles you haven't seen before. You'll notice that we're recommending to hold at 3.5 FTEs, and that we have had a pretty considerable consolidation because we have fewer directors than we did a year ago. And so a few comments on that. I've already mentioned the senior policy analyst. And council, I will tell you that I really need that position to steward the Sound Transit work. That position also works somewhat as an ombudsman to help me with other things that might come up, citizen needs. that I don't have capacity to manage. So that's a pretty important position. It's included in your budget. I want to talk about the director changes that have happened. I already mentioned we had 2 director positions eliminated this year due to workforce reductions. We had a department head position that was reclassified. I'll show you that in a minute. Basically, HR director to HR manager this year. And another department head position was reclassed in 2019, IGS director to IS manager. What's not shown on this slide is we've also had a pretty considerable director turnover. We have an interim finance director. We will have an interim planning director. For those of you watching that didn't know that, we'll be announcing that tomorrow in the MI Weekly. And I'm missing one position that's also turned over. We have a new city attorney and you have a new city manager. So that's a pretty staggering amount of change at the director level. And I'm mentioning this because the management responsibilities have shifted and evolved and changed as we've changed as an organization. But we've had to stabilize in other ways. And so Public Works is a good example. Although Public Works has absorbed park maintenance, to really stabilize that department, we need to make sure there's appropriate management level support. Again, so just a comment there on the finance director. I think I'll stop there and see if there's any questions, burning questions on city attorney or city manager's office. Keep going.
Yeah, I don't see, nobody's hand is raised, but can I just ask a question?
Oh.
This is for the city attorney, and, Jesse, I assume that your preparation of restructuring, you're in conversation with, in this case with Beal. And so I'd like to hear from him in terms of efficiency and what have you, because obviously this is a different model that we had before when we did have a city attorney and an assistant attorney. And I recall at that time, it was viewed as a good thing because we cut down on the number of outside counsel that we needed.
So Benson, I think as Jesse was mentioning, we're at a time where we need to be flexible and nimble. And that includes, the legal services that the staff needs, especially with a reduction in staff in other departments. You have, a lot of staff that are taking on new roles and expanded roles that require more of a specialty handholding. Although our department has been trying to provide that internally, and we've had some success in the past in doing so. At this point, I think it's been a good change to bring in specialty attorneys with specialization that can actually help staff more thoroughly in all these specialty divisions that they need, specialty help that they need. Again, like as Jesse mentioned, this is a budget net neutral move, and we've tried it for about for 6 months or so last year. It worked out pretty well, if it comes to a point where the older model makes more sense, it's easily reversible to where it was before.
Thank you.
So I am in full support. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Beal. Councilmember Jacobson.
Jake, you're muted.
Jake, you're muted?
There we go.
Can we take about a 5 or 10 minute break, please?
Sure.
Because we've been going at it now for almost 2 hours.
Okay, well, building up all that momentum, let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. So we should be back at 8:35.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mayor Wong, we are back live.
Great, all right.
Jake, is that chocolate you're eating?
I was eating it,
Oh,
protein bar.
see the downside of being virtual, you can't share with the rest of us.
I know, I would have brought 2 boxes of them for everything, you know, so everybody could have several, but you'll just have to wait until we're in phase 5 or whatever it takes to get back together one-on-one.
All right, let's get back to it. I'll pick up the pace a little bit. I don't want this to be a death by budget presentation, so. Let's plan on doing this, council. I'm going to walk you through the finance department and the admin services department, and then we'll take a break for questions. Get my screen to move here. Finance department by function 2021. Again, a snapshot of all of the things our finance team does, which is a lot. It's frankly one of the teams I'm most concerned about being under-resourced going into the next biennium. So it's something I want to talk to you about as we go through the budget process. A reminder, kind of 3 big buckets here: accounting services, the financial reporting, analysis, and budget component, and then our treasury services, cash receipting, banking, et cetera. And I got to make an adjustment on my end here. Snapshot, January 2020, 7 FTEs, including an interim finance director. 4 of those positions are represented by a collective bargaining agreement, and 3 team members work in our utilities team. I did have a question in advance from a council member: is why do you need 3 people to do utility billing? I will note that one of these 3 people is out actually in the field reading meters, and our 2 other staff work on billing functions, which does in fact take 3 team members to deliver. In the future, when we upgrade our water meters, we will likely be working with the union and of course you, City Council, to transition from reading meters in the field to stewarding our water meter system, which I am not the best person to talk about, but Jason Kittner and Lawan Tuttle are available if you have any questions. In 2021 then, a look ahead, really the team has not changed a whole lot. I am recommending that one of the positions you consider, funding is another financial analyst. It's shown here as a utilities team position, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Again, I am concerned about how we're resourced in our finance department. We rely on this department to do every single thing in the city. Things that we often forget about, like grants administration. It's the workload has backed up quite a bit. So speaking of that financial analyst position, if it is funded, what would we recommend doing with that position? It's supporting the utilities team, which also means the utilities fund would be contributing to the salary, as I've noted here, about 75%. And this is work in the city's water, sewer, and stormwater rate models, also supporting the utilities capital program teams and all of the maintenance happening within our utilities. Currently, all of that is done by predominantly by Lawan Tuttle, and as you know, she is spread really, really thin. So it's a position we'll be talking about going forward. It's, again, something I wanted to put in front of you for consideration and further discussion during the budget process. Admin services, I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. This was a team we were in the process of assembling at the beginning of 2020 due to some other changes within the city that had already occurred. And we've just kept working on that through the pandemic. So our technical teams, IT, IGS, HR, facilities, communications, all combined into admin services. So this is the functional org chart, what administrative services does. You'll note in here also website administration and risk management, which do not have FTEs assigned to them. That is something that generally is handled by Allie Speets right now. Allie's our liaison to WCIA, handles a number of other risk management issues for the city. Website administration, we do not have a website administrator. I am not recommending one in this budget. It is a pretty significant work item that is overseen by Ally, but is decentralized out through the organization. So we're all contributing to website. Okay, this department is a little more interesting to explain because it's new. So as I mentioned, in January 2020, we were already in motion, moving some teams underneath Ally, who serves as our Chief of Administration. That included our facility staff and contracted custodial services, the HR department, and the IGS or IT department as well, and the Sustainability and Communications Manager also. 13 FTEs at this time, 13 individuals working in those positions, 2 vacancies, the HR director and the IS manager. In September 2020, and again, Council, I shared with you that we're kind of snapshotting moments in time because this is a team that, oh geez, sorry. This is a team that's changed a little bit. We did have some workforce reductions. We laid off our facilities team because we knew all of our buildings were going to be idle or much less utilized. That is still the case and is projected to continue for some time into 2021. The HR director was reclassified to an HR manager. We do have somebody in that role now. We have a vacant HR coordinator. We outsourced some things. Bargaining, all of our bargaining work was previously done in-house by the HR director. We have a contract, somebody supporting us doing our bargaining work. And then this is minor, but it was a pretty significant staff burden. We've outsourced our flexible spending accounts. So for staff that enroll in flexible spending accounts, we now use a Navia benefits solution. It's all automated. So we're not doing any of that paperwork anymore, and that's been a huge efficiency move for us. Payroll is also under admin. And then the IS and IT team, and again, this is a snapshot of where we are right now. So right now we're at 11 FTEs. We started the year at 13 with this team. And then, thanks for the fun animation, Ally. This is what we're recommending going into 2021. And what I want to call your attention to particularly is those boxes on the left-hand side of your screen in that gold color. Council, you may recall that when the pandemic started and we were shutting down buildings and phone lines and moving things around, we stood up what we've called the call center, which is effectively, it's part of our EOC team. We have all of our phone lines centralized now. This has been a pretty big concern of mine since I came to the city. It wasn't always clear where the front desk of the city was, and our front desk at City Hall was staffed by planning department staff, usually permit techs, who were doing double duty and trying to assist with other matters. So what I'm recommending is to take what has been a largely successful, although still learning and evolving, call center model. Those are temporarily funded positions right now, and make them permanent and centralize our customer service. And I'm gonna have Ally chime in here. You know, I really think that this is one of our efficiency opportunities. Previously, you know, and I hope improves customer service as well, people didn't always know who to call. So the idea is one phone line. We've actually been tracking a lot of performance data here. I think we're hitting about 50% of our calls can be answered by the call center. Angie, who serves as our temporary call center supervisor, is really working right now on training the call center staff to be able to answer more questions and handle more of the questions the first time rather than referring them out. Ally, anything that else you wanted to say before I move on and take questions?
No, just happy to answer questions if they're specific.
Okay, one more slide and then I'll pause for questions. So again, this is just summarizing what I've already said. The customer service team is 2.5 FTEs. It's new, not totally new to us. We've been using this in a temporary structure since, I don't know, around April. And another big change, sorry, I skipped it, is I'm proposing to split the communications manager and sustainability work And Council, I shared an email with you. You know, in my observation, I think it was a good pairing for a time, but I will just say that communications work far exceeds a 0.6 FTE, and that's not just because we're in a pandemic. That's pretty consistent. Even in 2019, you know, sustainability continues to take the back seat. So when we get to the Public Works Department, I'll share a little bit more about the sustainability position and what I'm recommending you consider there. In the meantime, you will see the change here is recommended to a full-time dedicated communications manager. All right. One other note, facilities and custodial services functions are proposed to be included in the Public Works Department. So let's take a quick pause and see if anyone has any questions at this moment in time, or everybody's just tired of me talking and wants to go home.
We have Councilmember Anderol.
Oh, Jesse, can both things be true? I have questions and I want to go home.
Yes, yes.
But I am home, so it's fine. No, so if I'm trying to think back to the slide, it looks like there's an HR manager, but then there's a payroll specialist that's separate. And I don't understand why the payroll specialist doesn't report up through the HR manager. And then I also don't understand why the GIS specialist doesn't report up under the IT.
Those are...
Because, I mean, and I'm mindful of what you were talking about is reducing the number of direct reports you have. The number of direct reports that any director has is, you know, exponentially burdensome the more you have. And so the more you can kind of consolidate that down. So if Allie or Jesse, if you could just talk to both of those things.
Allie?
Yeah. Councilmember Anderol, I think the reason that we are a little spread out right now is the actual staff that are in the positions. So it's whether it's history or whether it's a new appointment. You know, two people that were hired around the same time in the same level, one's now above, and this will be their first experience supervising. So I think that it is, I think there's definitely an availability for that to happen in the future. But right now with these changes that have been made, I think it's just easier for there to be some direct report between myself and a few of the staff. But it's definitely something we can look to in the future. You know, the IT manager position, it was an IS manager position, which would have been over everyone. Now that position's specifically focused on IT and not on GIS. You know, the one thing I can say is these are the people that are in positions currently. They're strong managers, they're strong leaders, strong employees. So, you know, the oversight is definitely different than having to be really hands-on.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Allie, this is Benson. The question I have, I mean, just looking at the customer service, I mean, it's 2.5 FTEs. I mean, is that how it's currently staffed now, or is this going to be an increase in FTEs?
Well, it's staffed in the EOC as 3 FTEs. So there's 1 lead position and then 2 representative positions. And then there are additional staff that have been trained in it in the call center, so they can step in if needed. So this is actually a reduction in the current level of service. However, we are hopeful that a few of the staff that have been helping can continue to help if we do need
The half FTE shown here is attached to a half FTE shown in the planning department. We're hoping, we're proposing a share, half permit tech, half customer service call center. So that was one efficiency we identified in kind of bringing these teams back online.
Okay, great. Thank you. I don't have anybody else's hand raised, and so unless Councilmember Anderol, your hand is up, but is that okay? Go ahead, Jesse.
Okay, we are nearing the finish line. We are to the 4 departments that have had the most changes now. So let's take these department by department. I want to make sure, again, I'm not asking for decisions tonight. Just want you to understand what comprises my budget recommendation that will be coming out next week. Let's start with community planning and the development department. Again, a quick look at the department by function, 4 broad categories: administration, building plan review and inspection, arborist services, and land use planning. This is a snapshot of the department in January of 2020, and I'll call your attention to that number at the top of the screen: 24.9 FTEs and a total of 26 individuals. One of the departments most impacted by the reductions and by a loss of revenue is the CPD department. So this is a snapshot of September 2020 at 17 FTEs, including a vacancy in the director position, which I already announced earlier. We do have an interim director coming on board on Monday, and I'll be sharing information with about who we've recruited in the MI Weekly tomorrow. And again, Allie had some fun with the animation here. This is what we're proposing in 2021. 17 FTEs, total of 18 individuals. So council, if you can see my mouse cursor here, the half FTE position I was just referencing that's attached to half of a call center position is right here. This is a partially restoring a position that was laid off. I will note I'm recommending bringing back a planner. And then I have 2 positions here that are shown for your consideration, for funding consideration. Let me start with the senior policy analyst. I think the job title doesn't matter as much as what the position will do. I noted previously that we have largely suspended our long-range planning work plan. We are fully focused on permit processing, inspections, and code compliance work. We have a half-time code compliance officer down from a full-time. So one of the things I'm concerned about is this staff team does not have a lot of bandwidth to do long-range planning work or policy work. And we should talk about that as part of the budget. How do we properly resource that work? And frankly, what are the priorities looking like for the next biennium? We have a new interim director coming on, and I'm sure he will have some guidance, be able to share some guidance for us about where we are now, where he thinks we need to go. We can contract out for some long-range planning work or policy work. It's just something that we need to talk about and really think through what that work entails. Also on your list for consideration is an economic development coordinator position. You may recall going all the way back to your planning session in January, you had directed me to come back with a proposal to fund this position. We didn't get much further into the year. We had a pandemic. We tried to do some economic development work, some small business support through myself, council members, other staff. It just was not working. Our business community needed more. So we established a temporary EOC position. Many of you know Sarah Bluvis has been serving in that role quite effectively, I might add. But she's in a temporary position. And so it's your economic development coordinator position is on the list for funding consideration. I will tell you, council, that having a dedicated FTE to support the business community has really been a very good thing for us, and I hope the business community would express their support for the work that Sarah's done. Without this position, I honestly think we fall back to service levels before the pandemic. I think Sarah, in her temporary role, granted it's a temporary role, has been able to move us forward in a number of ways, including just simply establishing regular communication. She's helped us with a lot of policy work, secured a grant. That was all work that we weren't able to do without that position. So again, where we're at in the budget recommendation is 15 FTEs, including the 1.5 positions that are shown here as restored, and then 2 positions for you to consider during your budget discussions. Let's see if I missed anything. I guess the thing I want to make sure you know that through workforce reductions, We started out the year with a full-time code compliance officer and a full-time building inspector, plans examiner. We had a reduction, and now we've got a split half-time code compliance officer, split with a building inspector. So that's an important service level change. The other thing I want to talk about when we get to Public Works is the Development Engineering Review Team is proposed to move to Public Works. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Important here, really important work plan item. We have work to do with the planning department. It's our permitting workload is exceeding our staff capacity, and yet our revenues have declined. Have not really made sense of where the disconnect is there yet. I suspect it's a number of things. It's probably some to do with our current code, and some of it is to do with our fee structure, and also we probably need to look at our staffing structure. So I fully anticipate, this is one of those departments where I think it's important to anticipate with an interim planning director coming on. He's gonna get involved in the day-to-day operations. He is, we are going to put on the work plan for 2021 to look at our fees, to look at our code, to really dive into what the structural problem is here, why our revenue is declining and workload is remaining so high. It's a real big concern, and council, I want to tell you, this is an area that we need to focus on as a high priority in 2021. So why don't I stop there and just ask if there's any questions about this department, what you see here. Again, you'll have lots of opportunity when we get into budget discussions as well.
Councilmember Neese.
Thanks. On that slide, Jesse, on CPD, you're kind of talking about the absence of long-range planning. And when we think about where we are in the long-range planning process, we're kind of in that Vision 2050, buildable lands, trying to get numbers together on capacity, where we are in the last growth management allocation. I've looked at the numbers. We're over halfway through the allocation, and that was to run through 2035. I thought that we had submitted some pretty strong statements during the 2050 visioning exercise, kind of declaring that we were going to head towards being built out. When we think about long-range planning and the pressures on Mercer Island, given the few number of lots that are left that are really appropriate to build, when we balance out critical areas and setbacks and some of the other things that we need to preserve, and infrastructure, and even being able to, as a city, support a population that's growing, north of 30,000. Where do we stand on a policy perspective before we get into a budget cycle where we start to say that we need to allocate resources for long-range planning, when maybe what we really need to do is declare that we're built out?
Sure, that's a big conversation for this evening's presentation, Councilmember Neese. I certainly understand the position that you're taking. Perhaps when I use the term long-range planning, it's overbroad. What I really mean is that whole body of policy work, whether it's code work, it's code amendments, it's comprehensive plan amendments, or it is in fact long-range planning. We are under-resourced to do all of that work. I will be delivering to you with the budget a list of what I consider outstanding work, pending work, ideas that have been shared over time, even a number of the policy items that the council identified at the beginning of this year that we have not gotten to, so that the council has a snapshot of what's outstanding or what's pending or what's coming. I'm not sure during the budget that we'll have enough time to really do an ample prioritization process, but that's certainly where we need to work towards, to your point, to make sure we have resources aligned with your work plan. So what I will simply say is I don't have an answer for your question tonight. I think that's a policy consideration for the council. Just keep in mind that your planning department team is largely focused on daily operations, and there's not a lot of capacity right now for policy work of any type. And we need to talk about what we do about that.
No, and I appreciate that. My inbox reflects that, because I'm not getting a lot of suspicious emails about crazy code amendments.
Yeah.
The docketing process for code amendments this fall, is that going to take place in October, do you believe?
Yeah, it goes to the Planning Commission in October, and then I believe it comes back to you in November. I don't have the exact date in front of me. So
that may be another area to look at in terms of what's in the pipeline and what we have to budget for.
Yeah. And
all right, thank you.
Look, I also will say, let's be mindful as we get into these important discussions. Councilmember Neese is bringing up a point about what we actually have capacity for next year. I think before we dive into really that long list of policies, I need to spend some time on that department. And we have some critical foundational work that needs to be done. And the staff are energized and asking for help because their workload is so high right now. And we have customers that are frustrated because of permit backlogs. So we've got to put some of these things priority, get that fixed first before we dive back into a robust list of policies or policy work.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Weicker?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think this planning commission planning position might be useful, given that we might think we're built out, but our regional partners might not agree. So having someone in that position tracking what's happening with state and regional growth management issues, transportation issues, scooters, electric vehicles, building codes, all of that kind of higher level integrated, planning work, I think is useful. So I think that's good to have that in there to talk about later as we figure out which positions we can afford and which ones are higher priorities, because we need somebody keeping our eye on all that stuff.
Okay. Jesse, has the interim CBD person had a chance to weigh in on your proposed restructuring?
Yeah, preliminarily, we have talked. Certainly, when he gets here, he'll be diving in a little bit more. I think, as I've said with some of the other departments, the planning department is a department in transition. And right now, I'm showing, for example, a planner position being restored. What level that position is restored at, that may be something the director wants to evaluate. I know he will have some thoughts for you on prioritizing work, what comes first, what needs to get deferred. So I hope to get him up to speed as quickly as I can and engaged in our budget discussions.
Thank you. Councilmember Neese.
Sorry, I think that's leftover.
Oh, okay.
That's that down.
Okay, thanks. Jesse, no other hands right now.
Go. Okay. Oops, let me fix my screen here. Okay, moving on. Trying to move on. Not working. Okay, there we go. Youth and Family Services Department. Just a reminder, this was one of the departments that was most heavily impacted by the pandemic. As you all know, the thrift shop closed. Thrift shop revenue comprised about 64% of YFS department overall revenue. We did implement workforce reductions in the spring of 2020. My thanks, our continued thanks to the YFS Foundation and really the generosity of the Mercer Island community for their fundraising efforts. We were able to bring back some of what we had to reduce this spring. And I will just say a preview of the 21-22 budget is that we are still projecting a revenue gap in the next biennium. It looks like, again, I said this wasn't going to be a numbers presentation. It looks to be about $1 million in 2022. So thank you to the City Council and the YFS Foundation. We've formed a working group, and that is exactly what we're working on: long-term funding and stability. So that leads me to some of the changes. The YFS department is reporting now to the Chief of Administration, Ali Speets. Temporarily, they were working with Chief Holmes, which I know Chief Holmes enjoyed quite a bit, as did the YFS team. Chief Holmes has turned his attention to his own shop due to some recent transitions there. And the thrift shop team, I'll get to that in a minute. They're in transition, and I'll explain what that means. So by function, again, YFS has an administrative component, community-based programming, and then clinical services, which largely encapsulates our counseling services, both virtually, what was formerly Luther Burbank, and in the schools. A lot of changes here. So this is a snapshot at the beginning of 2020, almost 28 FTEs. We did implement, as I already noted, workforce reductions due to the loss of thrift shop revenue, and we dropped to 11 FTEs. Pretty staggering reductions. I will note almost 10 FTEs are right here, and that was thrift shop reductions. We had a number of staff furloughed. We had several layoffs, and all of our counselors were furloughed. We did have we have a vacancy right now, senior services case manager position. Looking ahead to 2021, let's see if I can move there we go. A slight increase, and again, this is with thanks to the YFS Foundation and the community, Mercer Island community, for donating one-time funds to help us bring our service levels back a little bit. Again, this team has proposed now to report up through administrative services. You'll see 2 positions here recommended for restoration. The Healthy Youth Initiative Prevention Specialist, largely tied to grants administration, and then a half-time programs assistant that we actually brought back just in 2020 through the contributions of the YFS Foundation. Your school counselors are still furloughed. We are not back to full-time service levels. That is, something that, when that happens, how that happens, we'll need to talk about. As I already noted, previewing the budget release, we have about $1 million gap, at least as of this week's estimate. We're still fine-tuning budget numbers. That $1 million gap is out into 2022, and we will need to talk about how we close that gap. I will be proposing right now to close it with one-time funding, reserves, if you will, contingency funds of the city. But certainly, we've got to keep our eye on it, because until the thrift shop is back and stable, we don't have a stable source of funding. So I think I've covered all of the notes on this slide. And just to mention that there has been a restructure here. We're reclassifying a position to be the administrator and have a reporting structure up through the YFS department. And this position will reporting to the chief of administration. So why don't I
Jesse,
stop there?
I'm sorry, can I ask a quick question regarding the YFS? And in particular, the Healthy Youth Initiatives. So in 2021, I see a HYI prevention coordinator and also an HYI prevention specialist. And then in September 2020, there was a HYI project coordinator. So you have all these different titles, and are they different positions, different duties?
We have lots of titles in the YFS department. Allie, can I ask for your help with this question?
Yes. So originally, part of the 2 manager positions, we're going to be doing some of the grant-funded work. We have decided that because of the changes in the department, that they're no longer going to do that work, and that's why we're hiring the specialist. The project coordinator and the prevention coordinator are the same position. We've just updated the title. Does that make sense?
It does. And then the specialist is going to focus on what?
Same thing.
Oh.
So the specialist, so point 4 of the community development administrative manager and the clinical programs supervisor, point 4 from each of their positions they're no longer being grant funded that way, and they're going to pay for the prevention specialist.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Hey.
Jesse, I don't see anybody else's hands, so
All right.
move on to parks.
We're in the home stretch. Parks and Recreation. Again, just a reminder, the Parks and Recreation Department was really considerably impacted by the pandemic, really consistent, same levels as YFS and the Planning Department. We closed the community center of March of 2020. We suspended our recreation programs, our special events, and our facility rentals. We have been able to bring back athletic field reservations and picnic shelter area reservations. Well, we brought back athletic field reservations. Picnic areas did not come back yet. So we're really on a minimal operations plan right now. Also, we moved park operations to the Public Works Department during this time. So we've been stewarding kind of the remaining operational needs of Parks and Recreation through our EOC team. I think most of you are aware of that. So this was a snapshot of the Parks and Rec Department in January of 2020. I will call your attention to the number at the top. We had 28.8 full-time staff, 2 vacancies, and a total of 30 individuals occupying those positions. At the time, we did have an interim Parks and Recreation director. September 2020, where we are now, is largely the Parks Operations team, which is, this group of staff. The manager, the Natural Resources team, Park Maintenance is moved under Public Works. We do still have a full-time custodian that was working primarily at the community center, and now she's covering all city buildings, or attempting to cover most city buildings. We do still have some work being performed by contract. And then we have a 0.3 FTE rec coordinator who's helping with things like field scheduling. And then this position is supporting parks capital projects. So again, a pretty considerable reduction in this department. So where are we headed with Parks and Rec? Council, I need to be honest with you, both Recreation and Thrift Shop are on a path to recovery. I'm not in a position right now to have fully formulated a plan in the budget, and I felt it was important to be honest with you that I'm not ready yet to roll out a plan. We need to spend more time on it. Frankly, where the Recreation Division is concerned, I am contemplating restarting the PROS plan. I think now is a great time to be having a conversation with our community about the future of this department. And I anticipate both, this will be iterative. I mentioned this already with the Thrift Shop. We'll be coming to you probably as early as the first quarter of 2021, presenting a recovery plan for services. And then, we'll be monitoring where things are at with the pandemic, ensuring that we can safely restart the community center. It will likely come back on in phases. Certainly, I want to be really mindful about finances because we were subsidizing the community center before we shut it down. So these are all things that still need to be worked out. And I will just plant a seed as we're thinking about the 2021-22 budget. I will be recommending we set aside some funding, one-time funding, to make sure we can restart the Recreation Division. We may need to do the same thing for the Thrift Shop. So what we've put together is, fancy name, transition team. We have brought the Thrift Shop team and the Recreation Division together under one team, and the functions look like this: little bits of Recreation and Thrift Shop. That's my favorite animation. I think it's Allie's too. What does that look like? It's one manager. These positions, by the way, have also been in the EOC, and I imagine will be in this EOC, supporting the EOC as we go forward. So what you see on the Recreation side here, down here, is 1.5 Recreation and Operations coordinators. That was the best we could do with the title. Here's what I'll say. They're supporting the functions that are currently happening in the Recreation Division, mostly athletic field scheduling, and they're also working a considerable amount in the EOC. This position right here is doing some recreation work, but is mostly doing all of our financial work for the EOC, all of our grants management, the CARES Act administration. So this is a real blended team here. And these are the two current thrift shop positions. Also, they're furloughed. These are FTEs. I would imagine as we start recovering and building back the thrift shop, we will need to recall or begin to partially recall these positions. And both of these teams, together with the support of my office, frankly, on the recreation side, I may need to get some consulting help. We'll be coming back to you with recovery plans, and I think that will largely take us into 2021. So I think I've already covered most of this. That transition team, which is a hybrid of folks working together right now in thrift shop and recreation, is reporting to Public Works. Although I will mention the city manager's office and both and admin services are also providing some support. Okay. Any questions about that before I get into what is a really the most changes to the org structure?
Jesse, I think you can go ahead.
All right. I've sufficiently worn you out, so keep going. Okay, again, already noted, the Public Works Department expanded in 2020 due to restructuring and impacts to other departments, largely workforce reductions. So this is a snapshot of the functional org chart for Public Works. Again, utilities, right-of-way, so our streets and stormwater services, park maintenance now housed here, support services, which is a combination of a whole bunch of teams under a new category here, and also new is a combination of the engineering and capital divisions. So some of our engineers, development review engineers, were housed in the planning department, and we're recommending combining them into one engineering team. Okay, let's walk through the transitions, and then I think I'll land on that last org chart. So this is the positions in Public Works at the beginning of 2020. I'll tell you, these numbers really start to not even make sense because we've moved whole teams here, but about 36 FTEs. Remember, there's a lot of staff here represented by collective bargaining agreements. In September 2020, 34.8 FTEs. You'll notice we have a lot of vacancies. We have had a couple of retirements. I'm really excited to mention that we've had some internal promotions, and Jason Kittner is working through that. Custodial services, you'll note here, is provided by contract partially. And this is the what I'm recommending for 2021. So remember I said, and it looks like I had an error on that previous slide, these numbers are going to start to not make sense because we've added whole teams to this department. So let me at least walk through what you're looking at, and then I'm sure there will be questions, and Jason's available. So the one thing I want to mention is you'll note I've changed the Public Works Director job title to Chief of Operations. This is a greatly expanded department. This title is more reflective of the current role, which is expanded well beyond Public Works. And certainly Jason in his current role functions frequently as a backup to the city manager. So that is the change there. Over here, no real big changes. This is your utilities team supported by utilities operations managers. So you've got both water and sewer foreman positions. Moving this direction, by the way, this whole group right here is combined now to be an operations and maintenance team. So remember, this team right here, Parks, and this support services team is new to Public Works. So again, this group right here, right away, this is all your streets team members and your stormwater team. Parks operations here, and I am recommending, we had almost hired and filled the Parks foreman position at the beginning of 2020. We stopped the process. However, council, I'll mention, we've really got to have a foreman, on par with the other positions in the other utilities team. This position functions like a field supervisor. Councilmember Reynolds asked me earlier, what about restoring parks maintenance casual labor? I have not included them in my budget. However, they are included on your list. And the reason is not because I don't think it's important to bring back the seasonal parks maintenance labor, but I think it's really important for us to have a level of service discussion at this juncture and talk about where we are and what it looks like to bring back all or part of this team. So when I shared this presentation with the staff last week, I could hear, gasps. I will tell you, Parks Maintenance team is working as hard as they possibly can to steward our resources. They are very understaffed, and this is going to be an important conversation for us to have. This is a new position, Support Services Manager, to oversee a whole combination of positions. Inventory team member, this is an existing position, supporting all of these teams. This is basically the person that gets all of our supplies, and I'm sure does more than that. Jason will have to weigh in. We do have a fleet mechanic also on staff that will be reporting to this new position. City Works Coordinator, another new position here. And again, Council, this is really getting to my theme of needing to emphasize and invest in our operations and infrastructure teams. We have a really robust asset management system called CityWorks that we have not fully been able to deploy. We brought the system on, and we don't have a person to manage it, to steward this really important piece of technology, and it's showing. It's not fully implemented, so I am recommending an FTE to manage asset management systems, which, by the way, this system is used by this whole team over here. So keeping it running, maintaining it is really critical to our operations. And by the way, everyone wants data. This is how we get it. This is how we know the cost of our assets. This is how we keep an eye on life cycle. Anyway, I'm getting way ahead of myself. We'll talk more about that in the budget. I know you've had questions about this. Why are we moving away from contracted services to FTEs? Frankly, it's quality of service. We are not, I'll let Jason chime in on this. We feel it would be a better investment of city resources to go to an FTE model. We've been contracting for a long time, and it's a tough market. So Jason has been managing this as our Public Works Director pretty much the entire year, and he is not going to make it much longer if we don't get him some senior level help. So I am recommending a Deputy Public Works Director to oversee this whole team right here, this operations and maintenance team. And this goes back to a comment I made way at the beginning of the presentation about the number of director positions that have been eliminated. Many of those management duties did not go away. They are loading up right now, particularly on this position, and this position is needed to sustain this structure. Before I go into the rest of the org chart, I do want to say this. I know several of you have said this department is just too big. My opinion is it's not the size of the department that matters so much. I can show you many other cities that have departments, 2 or 3 times this size. It's ensuring that we have the structure to sustain these teams. And this position becomes really critical to doing that. That is why it is in gold, and that is why it is recommended in my budget. These other positions that are either noted as being restored or new, I think are very critical to also supporting our operations and maintenance functions. Let me go here, and then let's come back to the sustainability manager position. So as I've already mentioned, and I'm sure you'll have questions, I am proposing to combine all of our engineering teams. The city engineer position is currently held by Patrick. Everyone knows Patrick. He's in the planning department. Proposing to bring him here and have him oversee development engineering. This is review of plans that come in. Our utilities inspectors, our CIP inspectors, and an admin assistant that's already existing. And then what we're calling basically our capital projects team and our engineering team. When we talked about public safety, I mentioned retirement concerns. for that, those two departments. I will tell you, there are upcoming retirements in the next 2 to 5 years in this team as well, including our city engineer, and he's given me the okay to mention that. I'm real concerned, council, that we don't have a succession plan here, which is why I'm recommending an infusion of staff positions. I'm also concerned that we don't have enough resources to deliver our capital projects, and we are falling behind. So you'll see here I'm recommending a development engineer, a new position to complement the existing position we have, and 3, I know, can you believe it? 3 capital project managers. Again, we have anticipated retirements throughout this team, and we need to bring in some staff at an entry level. Project management is often where you come in into an organization like this and grow your skills, so that when these key engineering positions, when the retirements occur, we have backfills. Okay, one more position to talk about, and then I'd be happy to take questions. And again, Jason is available as well. The Sustainability Program Manager, I do apologize. It wasn't my intent to reflect this work as being defunded. Simply to start the conversation about separating the Communications Manager and Sustainability work. As I've already mentioned, you have far more than 0.6 FTE communications demand. And frankly, I'd like to grow that position a little bit. Always, every day is another emergency or urgent situation, which means that job share becomes, really challenging, and sustainability, frankly, always takes the back seat. Council, in our previous discussions, I'm not sure that's what you intended. And so what I'm showing here is a full-time sustainability program manager for your consideration. I already said earlier, you may not desire to fund this at full time. I am recommending it at full time, and I'll be happy to talk more about this. The reason this position is here instead of in the city manager's office is frankly to integrate the sustainability work in everything that you see on this screen. We would all agree, Jason, myself, our managers, and even our staff, that we can do better in terms of the action that we are taking on the maintenance, operation, and even capital sides of our city functions. And one of the best ways to grow our sustainability program is to integrate this position into this team. All right, I have done a lot of talking on this slide. I hope it starts to make a little more sense in terms of what you're seeing. And I would certainly welcome questions, reminding you that this isn't the last time you'll take a look at this. We will have, I'm sure, lots of budget discussions about this proposal.
We do have some questions. City Council Member Rosenbaum.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just my question's sort of across the org. Do you want to hold those to the end, or what's easiest for you?
Yeah, why don't we take Public Works questions now, and then I'm happy to handle any final questions toward the end.
All right, I'll keep my hand up so don't forget my question.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Weicker.
Okay, I have a couple of questions, but I'll start with, first of all, wow, thank you so much for all of this work and thinking and consideration and future planning and budget mitigation work. And so my question sort of is mostly here because there's so many changes. Do we have the right people in the right places, and is this actually doable like within 2021, or is this sort of the framework that we can build for in the next biennium or two? Like, this is a lot of changes overall, and this work, especially this infrastructure work, is so critical to have right now. So just could you speak a little bit about all of this moving around and how staff are ready to jump right in, and how all of this is going to work?
So great questions. A lot of the moving around's already happened, right? So the pieces that you see here on the screen, the moves have already happened. Parks is already here. We don't have a deputy public works director, so as I mentioned, this position's pretty strained right now. Once the budget's adopted, and I'm not assuming right now that this is what gets approved, we will begin to phase in position recruitment. And I want to share that all of the new positions are restored positions. It's really important, council. We will do a competitive recruitment. In some cases, we may recruit internally, some cases externally. Deputy Mayor Weicker, down here, these CIP project managers, if the council funds all 3 positions, it's unlikely we will bring them on all at once, right? There would be a phased transition. So yes, we've started to talk about how we would onboard all these positions. Certainly don't want to get ahead of the council and the budget conversation because these positions aren't approved yet. So yeah, we're taking care and thought as to how we get this done. Here, I will say, without Jason chiming in, this is probably one of the most essential positions that we need to fill quickly because this position needs some relief. And I will point out a couple of examples. You will observe our shortage of capital project managers because, as you noted, Jason's had to step in and help with the thrift shop project. If we had more capital projects, capital project managers, I would have been moving work like that to them. So just as an example of where we're hurting a little bit on the capital team.
Jesse, just to add to that too, on the capital side, it's important to know that we have some really big and robust capital projects in front of us that aren't our normal pipe replacement projects, right? With the SCADA, supervisor control and data acquisition project, the meter replacement project, the booster station project. Those are unique projects that require more project management, more engineer time, more design time associated with them. Just they're very, very complex. And so with the existing resources we have, we accomplish those projects, but it comes at the expense of some of our pipe replacement or substandard water main replacement or other infrastructure needs that we have throughout our systems.
Okay. Councilmember Anderall.
Sorry, I think I lost the feed. I lost the feed. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I hear you.
Okay, I lost the Zoom connection, so hang on. Let me see if I can get it back real quick.
You're back. Nope.
Okay, now, all right. So I raised my hand a long time ago, and I think I wanted to ask about the sustainability issue. I guess I'm kind of torn. You know, we've gotten a lot of citizen input on sustainability, and it just feels to me like I would like before. Well, let me back up. I think that it is great to do a 100% communications position. I think the city needs better communications with its citizens, and I think that is wonderful. In terms of sustainability, my question is, what is that job description? Because I can't vote for or against a sustainability program manager unless I know what that person is doing. If it's all climate issues, I feel like that's not an issue that Mercer Island alone can move the needle on very much, really. And we have a lot of powerful regional partners who are already working on that issue. So why have regional partners if you're going to duplicate the efforts? On the other hand, if, you know, as suggested by some citizens in some emails, Jim Eanes recently, does sustainability encompass sustainability of city operations? And does that then coordinate with economic development? You know, maybe that's a fantastic thing. Yeah. So I would just like to really understand much more about what that job description would be, whether it really is a full-time position, you know, just to be more informed in terms of what we're going to be giving guidance on.
Sure. Let me just tackle it generally and know that we will have opportunity to come back and talk about this more at future budget meetings. The sustainability work we've been doing thus far, I would say, I'm going to generalize, and I know this will probably upset some folks. It's largely been policy work. And what Jason and I have talked about, and certainly with Ross as well, is that we're missing a critical opportunity to up our game, if you will. Here's a great example. We have a Parks Natural Resources team out stewarding open space areas. We have stormwater staff working on stormwater projects and stormwater capital projects, oftentimes in the open spaces, and they are not connecting, right? There is a huge environmental component of the work we are doing, and Jason and I feel that there's a really an important opportunity to integrate with a dedicated staff resource, this sustainability work into the operations and capital team. So that's a loose description. I actually do not see a marriage between this position and the economic development position. I really envision this being a much more operations, like maintenance operations focused position. Keep in mind you have big utilities that we steward, and there's certainly room for sustainability work to be done there. Not only internally how we operate, but the education and information we share with the community. Could this position be scaled up or down? Yes. I mean, it could be less than an FTE. I think there's more than enough work to be done within this team as it stands. But I welcome, that conversation, and certainly for future discussions, I will come with, we've got a bulleted list we developed of what I will call a loose, job description for this position as proposed. Jason, what did I miss? Probably a lot.
I would just say you're on the right track. I think a couple thoughts come to my mind as well, and that is, like, I'll use the sewer side of the house, for example. We convey our sewage around the island via pump stations. Those pump stations that run our pumps are some of our largest energy consumers on the island. They're also nearing the end of their useful life that have to be replaced in the near future. So there's an opportunity for the sustainability program manager to get involved on the capital side early in the design to help meet both the sewer utility operational needs in the future to replace that pump, to make it more operable, more reliable, and things like that, but still improve our sustainability, our energy usage, our carbon footprint, things like that go into the early stages of the design and through construction. So there's a lot of opportunities for that within the operations and the capital side. The other piece that I'll say is on the CityWorks side, you heard Jesse talk about CityWorks being partially implemented. It was implemented early on for utilities and the right-of-way team, but it was never fully implemented for parks operations and the facility side of the house. So bringing those two functions on, again, you can create key performance indicators that are tied to both O&M activities, but also sustainability components on the operations side of the house. So there is a dynamic here within the department that we could actually start seeing some fairly significant improvements within both the operation and the capital side.
Hey, Jesse, can I ask you to stop sharing your screen? And
Yep.
we do have a number of other hands raised. Excuse me, Councilmember Reynolds.
Thanks. Jesse, I want to echo Councilmember Weiger's comments. This is pretty amazing work you did. Thank you for all of it. I want to talk briefly about the sustainability thing and emphasize the importance to me of having that be a full-time position. I think it's a great thing that you're talking about that for addressing the sustainability of city operations, as Jason was just talking about, but also in terms of connecting and building upon the efforts done by our partners around the region, connecting with K4C and so forth. Helping the city develop a climate action plan, which has been something on the list for a long time, but hasn't happened. And then working with other groups like the Solarized Mercer Island campaign or the Island Vision folks to make sure that the person acts as a focal point or a linchpin, a connection to the city to make all these things happen. The one thing that concerned me and other members of the community, I think, when we saw this was that the position was marked in purple as something for council to talk about, as I interpret it, as opposed to in yellow, something which I understand you were actually recommending. I wonder if you can let us know what your thinking was, why it wasn't yellow. Is it because you didn't have it listed in the in the essential city services slide that you led off with? Is that kind of what it comes down to?
Sure. And I know this is dangerous territory, right? Because people
just a
will,
little.
people will argue it is essential. I really built the organizational structure with an operations focus, basically what we need to do, what I need right now to sustain the city services, that essential services list. I feel that a number of those positions, really all of them, are important to the city. And I also feel it's important for you, council, to have an opportunity to discuss how you want to prioritize these positions that are on the list. So it's not showing as funded right now for those reasons. I hope that, and I probably would have done it differently in hindsight. My intent was at least to retain a half-time, sustainability position through the transition. But we are where we are, and so I welcome your input and feedback. And remember, you've got 2 police officers, a financial analyst, you've got an economic development coordinator position, a policy position, and your seasonal park maintenance workers, if I didn't miss any, all on that list for discussion. I noted earlier, it looks like the surplus in the preliminary budget is annually about $700,000. I did that by design to give the council some flexibility, certainly to provide feedback on what I proposed here, but also to be able to have that really important policy discussion and prioritize those positions. You may have other positions as well. That's certainly a possibility.
Okay, that's pretty much what I was thinking was, your thinking was. Thank you, that's very helpful. I think what it brings home to me, though, is to a certain extent we're doing this backwards, where you did it forwards, but maybe the council didn't, which is, I think we need to start with the discussion of what are the essential city services. And to my knowledge, at least this generation of the council has not had that discussion. And maybe that can be part of our budget discussion when we start off getting into the budget in earnest, but I think it needs to be on the table.
Yeah, there's an old document, it's more than a decade old, that is called Priorities of Government. It's an old policy, and I do think it should be looked at some point.
Yeah, I remember looking at that once a long time ago, and maybe that could be a discussion starter document to say, do we still believe this?
Right.
As times have changed in the council, it's okay. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Neese?
So I have two questions, but I'll start with the sustainability since we seem to be on that theme. With respect to what that position would do, I think Lisa's point is well taken, because I'm on the sustainability subcommittee and we haven't met, I don't think, this year. I don't think I remember who's even on the subcommittee anymore. I think, Craig, you're on it, but Benson was on it, and I don't know if Betts is still on it. In any event, as we rolled out of 19 into 20, there was a lot of discussions about all of the work that had started but never gotten finished. There was the Scope 5 data dashboard for the city. Hasn't been updated since 2016. It's 2020 now. We spent most of 2019 talking about what it would take to get that updated. And to hear Jason talking about the opportunities within the infrastructure side of the house to put efficiency into a system, maybe measure it and take credit for it. Like, there's a lot of that work that has started but never been finished, and a lot of work related to it that many hours went into, but very little value came out of it. And I think it'd be critically important to look at that position and say to ourselves, what do we really expect to get out of that, and does it have the value that we really want to return to the citizens? The other thing that I would say in terms of how we budget for that position, I've always felt that the commodity value of the solid waste contract should come back and fund that position. To me, it makes very little difference to the ratepayer that we could buy down their rate with the value of the recyclable. And if we could look at this budget cycle and see what was the commodity value a year later, because we're now a year into new solid waste contract, maybe it's something that we could look at funding through that to tie sustainability and people's particular behavior to funding that position. The question I wanted to ask was, in terms of the org chart, what certainty do we have when we look at that org chart and we see a custodian that halfway through the biennium we don't lose a custodian but gain a mechanic? You know, are these positions fungible? I know it's a work in progress, but should we look at that at this budget planning process and expect that 2 years from now, we would still largely have those positions? Or are we really funding a bucket of money to do a broad spectrum of work, and maybe we won't have 2 janitors?
That's a good question, especially as of recently, we've made so many changes. Your city manager, you know, myself, I generally have authorization to up to a certain FTE count and some flexibility when position changes need to be made, generally within a fund. It's not possible to move positions easily with, you know, between funds. So what I would say to that is, you know, I do retain some flexibility to adapt as needed, and I would certainly like to retain that flexibility. But that is also tied to a work plan that, aside, you know, pandemic years aside, I should be able to deliver. So you're resourcing for a certain level of service and to meet a certain number of deliverables. I may have to adapt and modify as we go. I don't anticipate that we would move away from custodians without coming to talk to you. So when I'm asking you to fund a custodian, that money is either going to a custodian or it would turn around and go back to a custodial contract, not to a planning department staff member. I will say, I do want to just say this about, you know, the sustainability work plan. Like so many things in 2020, we had desires to get caught up, many of the things that Councilmember Neese just referenced. The sustainability work plan was largely suspended. I know that Ross attempts to nibble away at it as time allows, but our communications demand has not been very forgiving this year, to be frank.
And just to be clear, I'm talking about mostly 2019 issues that were open issues in 19 that we were having trouble getting across the goal line. You know, they would get to the 30-yard line, but couldn't get all the way through.
Okay, Councilmember Andrew?
Old hand, I will lower my hand.
Councilmember Jacobson?
One of the things with these added positions that crosses my mind as someone who's run businesses is what are the qualifications we're looking for, which then really leads to what is the job description? Taking the sustainability manager as a case in point, if we're expecting this person to be able to analyze the electrical loads of pumps, that requires a certain skill set. I would think an engineering skill set probably, or considerable experience in that kind of thing. If it's managing, going to listen to other people pontificate at regional meetings, that doesn't take a whole lot of background. So for all of these positions, and this isn't about sustainability only, I think we should be being sure we've got job descriptions and the qualifications we're really looking for. And I'm not suggesting that isn't the case, but I think that's something that would sway me in terms of understanding what we're looking for in terms of adding or subtracting, for that matter, people. I'd also say I commend you, Jesse, for this opus magnum you've done. It's I think a very good way to set the table for the budget discussions, and really, which are really, in my mind, the work plan for the biennium. We could go ahead, do something in January, but the horses are out of the barn at that point.
Sure.
Jesse, Councilmember Jacobson's point, I guess, I assume that next time we see these positions in the context of the budget, there will be a more detailed description of job duties and expectations, plus obviously the budgeted amount for salaries and what have you.
Sure. Yeah. I will be honest with you, the budget document does not include robust job descriptions for every position in the city. I'm happy to take it a step further. I think Councilmember Jacobson, your point is well taken. In fact, something that Jason and I have been wrestling with is these 3 CIP project manager positions we've proposed. There's a difference when you hire an engineer versus a an architect or somebody with a project management certification. And Councilmember Neese's point, you know, I may have to toggle around. We may have one engineering position, you know, 2 entry-level project managers. And, you know, that's where things are still in development. You know, council, my practice is to be transparent and share with you as things are developing. And I do anticipate this biennium, there will continue to be some changes and the organization will evolve. One final point, the sustainability program manager is a perfect example. I have a vision of how I think a position like that could be used. This is a group effort and certainly a policy. The budget is a policy document you approve. So I want to make sure you all understand that the door is absolutely open for you to provide feedback, set goals and work plan expectations, and drive up the performance. And tell me if this position is funded, Jesse, this is how we want you to pursue it. So I will certainly share my ideas and welcome yours. And I'm sure the community will have feedback as well through the budget process.
I'm going to let the deputy mayor bring it home when your hand is still ready.
All right, I will just close it by saying the sustainability manager, I think, can do, hopefully, if it's a full-time position, it can do the K4C policy work with our planner and get into the weeds literally around park projects and managing volunteers to do Saturday cleanups with Mountains to Sound, help with recycling, education, outreach, water conservation, backflow, reaching out to our residents, all of that work. I think there's plenty of work there to do. So I'm eager to see how that job description and possible position plays out. But I guess I want to close it by saying, I know we can't keep all these positions in purple. I know we don't get all the positions in yellow. I know we don't get to bring back all those furloughed positions we want to bring to full time. So I hope when we get into the budget discussion, we can be clear about what our priorities of government really are and what we can actually do given the budget headwinds and the ongoing COVID economic impacts and uncertainty we're all facing. So Jesse, awesome job. Thank you to you and the team for getting this done. And I think the hard part's going to be next when we have to choose one position over another. And I absolutely support 120% starting with the basic infrastructure and long overdue capital and public safety and public works projects that aren't fun, aren't pretty, aren't always able to see and touch, but absolutely critical and worse when they don't work and go wrong. So thank you for keeping that kind of in mind as we move forward and figure out which of these other want to have positions are actually doable. So thank you for keeping that context in mind as we move forward.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. For the public who, if they're still watching, this is obviously a preview of the discussions that are going to occur in the next couple of meetings. So stay tuned. Obviously, this is a good policy discussion that we're having. City Manager, thank you so much for all your work.
Mr. Mayor, I still have my general question that I was told to wait.
Oh,
sorry,
yeah,
Dave.
I'm sorry.
All right.
Sorry, Councilmember Rosenbaum. You are going to close it out.
Jesse, thanks for your work on this. The past, present, future way of looking at this, I think, is really helpful. One thing I wanted to ask you is, you know, we talked about some of these new positions and also obviously retirements need to be backfilled. Where's sort of a recruitment fall in here? Is there additional capacity for that you're envisioning, or?
Recruitment, sorry, Dave, it's a little hard to hear you right now. You asked about recruitment?
Yeah.
Yeah. Team effort, we don't have a dedicated recruiter. You know, on occasion, not recently, we've hired recruiters to help fill positions. Pretty much we run everything through the HR department. They oversee all of the recruitment, and then team managers and team leads are certainly involved as well.
Okay, because it would seem to me like across the organization, there's going to be some real needs. You know, I don't know if it's in 21 or 22, but there's, just based on sort of what you produced for us, it seems like we're going to need some help around there.
Yes, and I will say that your HR department is well equipped. We've had a lot of recruitment. It may not have been visible to you, but we have had turnover this year. And so, you know, Allie and the HR team are, you know, our aces. They've been handling all of that, even the internal recruitments from start to finish.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. So council, before Mayor Wong cuts me off totally. Just wanted to remind you that it is our intent to publish. We may be not getting sleep between now and next Thursday, but to publish your budget on October 1st. And as a reminder, we tortured you with this presentation tonight so that you understood the complexities of all the organizational changes that comprise your budget document. And then we'll kick off our budget discussions on October 13th.
Thank you. Again, thank you for all the hard work, Jesse, and to your leadership team. I know the hour is getting late and people are probably tired, but we do have one final item of special business, Agenda Bill 5746, City Council Liaison Appointments. As you know, during our last City Council meeting, we postponed taking action on the G. Rich Hill Code Amendment. As part of that discussion, the council expressed a desire to have liaisons available to help facilitate discussions that might occur among interested parties. The purpose of this agenda bill, brief as it is for the council to identify and appoint individuals who will serve as liaisons. However, before we discuss who might be appointed by the council, I think it's important, I think you would all agree, it's important for the council to come to some sort of consensus regarding the role and responsibilities and expectations of the liaisons, and also to confirm the number of liaisons. I want to open up the discussion to the primary role of the liaisons to see if the council can reach general consensus on what those roles and duties might be. For instance, should the primary role of the liaisons be to listen to interested parties, help facilitate discussions among interested parties, report back to the full council about those discussions in order to keep the full council apprised, and to not represent that they are acting on behalf of the city council? I just throw those four things out, looking for any kind of feedback. Councilmember Anderall. And this again is simply on the discussion regarding the roles and duties, expectations of the liaisons. Councilmember Anderall.
Yeah, so I have two, twin and opposing views on this. One, I think it's always good to engage the community and try to broker some sort of a, I don't want to say deal, and I don't want to say compromise, and I don't want to say, a mediation or anything, but I think it's good to get parties listening to each other. So I would be in favor of the liaison on that, in that respect, but I'm not sure that really gets us to an end game, which is, is this amendment appropriate? How is council going to act on it? I fear that it could just chew up a lot of time and not really get us to a better endpoint. I mean, I think the applicant is responsible for the code amendment application, and I think the J is responsible for their compliance or non-compliance with the current CUP. And I'm just not sure how much a liaison could really do. Like I said, that's not to say that I don't think that talking and trying to negotiate things or come to common ground is a bad thing. I think it's a good thing, but so I'm really conflicted about this. I would welcome other people's comments on it.
Does anybody else want to comment? Councilmember Reynolds.
I think these are important questions, and to me, I think the issue really is, if I think back on the experience I had with the Planning Commission, one of the reasons that process got derailed was I think we too quickly got down into trying to write down the rules before identifying what the problem was we were trying to solve and what the solution would look like. And I view the key role of this group is to constructively engage with the parties on all sides, all the stakeholders, and try to find out what they're really after. What's the outcome they want? Not what rule do they want, but what might a redeveloped facility look like and what problems need to be solved as part of that facility redevelopment. If that can be done in a productive, forward-thinking way, and I think the forward thinking is very important because we can all look back at the past and talk for days about mistakes that have been made, cups that haven't been enforced, bad planning commission discussions, what have you. But forward looking, say, where do we want to be? And then think about what a path might be to get there. And only then begin to think about, is the Hill Amendment the right one? If there's some better solution that accomplishes that objective. And that's what I'm hoping that, that the group could look at.
Thank you. Councilmember Jacobson.
My observation about this situation over on the east end of our island is that the parties haven't really talked to each other and haven't done what I think my colleague, Councilmember Reynolds, just said, and that was to lay out what their expectations are, other than being reactive to something that another party said. And my experience is that unless or until those parties have exchanged some ideas and have become willing to listen to the other side, whatever happens will be a repeat of the past. And I think that's a waste of time and effort. For example, if the Hill Amendment or the Hill Code Amendment, whatever you want to call it, passes legal muster that Jessie said she was going to check on, without doing some work, there's likely to be litigation. And we're going to be involved because we're going to be the ones that are sued. And we're going to experience a bunch of costs that nobody's going to reimburse. And I'm not suggesting that any two people in this group of seven, or any group of seven you find, are going to be able to get people aligned. But I think it's worth a try. In my professional life, I've found many times that insoluble problems or intractable conflicts can be resolved, but never have they been resolved until people start putting some things on the table and talking to each other. And I think that's the job of this, how many ever people are sent out to do this thing, is to get these people talking, to listen to what they have to say, and attempting to identify some common interests and figure out what are the points of conflict, and suggest to the city council, and maybe suggest to the parties, here's some ways you could resolve those areas of conflict. And I wasn't born at night or last night, so I'm not suggesting this is going to be successful. It may not be, but the amount of effort that's going to be involved, I think, is well worth the possibility that we can save the city a lot of pain and suffering.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Weicker.
Yeah, so I guess I have some questions about authority and what we're tasking this group to do, and with what level of staff support, and what I get. We're trying to get folks to, walk hand in hand and find some common goals and forget the past and look to the future. But what exactly is this group charged with doing, and what city resources are being asked to support it? Do we have any clarity on that?
Jesse, do you have any response regarding staff support?
Sorry, I stepped away.
No, the question was, to what extent is the city going to staff these liaisons? That was a question. And to what extent?
And to what authority do they have? And
Sure.
this, knowing this could be legal and it's tied in land use and all that, so.
In terms of staff resources, I have very little to offer, and I have spoken with Councilmember Jacobson, and I believe Councilmember Rosenbaum about that as well. That was, one of the things that intrigued me about this effort is asking the council to go and, I think do what Councilmember Reynolds described and Councilmember Jacobson just now as well. So I'm not planning to dedicate a whole lot of resources. I know There may be questions that come up from time to time, and certainly the planning department staff and perhaps the new interim planning director will be a resource. I think the authority and the scope is ultimately what the council conveys. I discourage the team from getting involved in code compliance issues. That really should remain with the staff. But having a policy conversation, that's perfectly appropriate for a council team member to do with the authority of the full council, of course.
So again, I just want to sort of bring this back. I mean, you know, I know there may not be a general consensus, but I guess just listening to folks, I mean, there is this desire to constructively engage and listen to, you know, interested parties, stakeholders. And part of that involves helping facilitate the discussion that people, you know, basically are saying the folks need to talk to each other. So I would think that's probably the general charge to this group, whoever they may be. Again, whether it's 2 or 3 folks, they don't speak for the entire council. They have to come back and just report. And so I don't envision them with any kind of decision-making authority. That's not what they're charged with, I don't believe. But I think I've spoken to some of you. I think it's going to be important for whoever these folks are to come back on a regular basis and report back to the full council so everybody is apprised of what is going on. I mean, this is not kind of a rogue activity. I mean, this is something that the council expressed a desire to commit time and effort to try to bring parties together. And so that's, again, kind of a general overview of what I personally think that the liaisons are charged to do. I really haven't heard anything contrary to that, so I'm hoping that maybe that kind of general description is acceptable. Is that, I don't want to, unless, I got 1 thumb up, 2, 3, I got 4, 5. So I think that's probably the general consensus, okay? And then the next question is, how many people want to serve? And so, you know, I think at this point, unless I hear, oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Anderall, do you have your hand is up? Oh, okay. Okay. So now the question is how many folks to serve as liaisons? I know that we probably have had some discussions, and I understand that Councilmember Jacobson and Rosenbaum have expressed a willingness to serve. I appreciate all the thoughts that people have put into this, and I guess I would propose that maybe just those 2 people serve as liaisons unless there's somebody who wants to throw his or her name into the fray. Okay, I don't see any further discussions on this, and so I'm going to ask the council for a motion to appoint council members Jacobson and Rosenbaum to serve as city council liaisons until February 28, 2021. The reason for that date, of course, is that the city council will have the Rich Hill code amendment issue sometime in March. So again, I entertain that motion.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay. Was it moved by Councilmember Jacobson or Reynolds? Okay.
Reynolds.
Okay. So it's been moved by Councilmember Reynolds and seconded by Councilmember Anderall to appoint council members Jacobson and Rosenbaum to serve as city council liaisons until February 28, 2021. City clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Jacobs,
Aye.
Councilmember Reynolds,
Aye.
Councilmember Rosenbaum,
Aye.
Councilmember Randall,
Aye.
Councilmember Neese,
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Weicker,
Aye.
and Mayor Wong.
Aye. Thank you. Motion passes, and I encourage all interested parties to reach out. Again, we're here to help facilitate, and to help listen. And so I encourage you folks to reach out to council members Jacobson, and Rosenbaum. The next regular city council meeting will be Tuesday, October 6th at 5 p.m. There's no other business to come before the council. The time is now 10:10 p.m. and the meeting is adjourned. Is there, well, I should have asked if there's anything that anybody has to bring forward. I'm seeing nobody raising their hands, so the meeting is adjourned. However, please remain seated until the city staff has terminated the Zoom broadcast. Good evening and stay safe.